Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Nightmare Narratives. I can picture some of you already in bed, maybe some of you just getting home from work. Wherever you are, whatever time it is, I'm glad you're here. If this helps you relax or sleep, please like and subscribe. It means a lot. Now let's get you comfortable, and I'll tell you tonight's story. My name is Solomon Driftwood, but everyone calls me Saul. I've been a park ranger for 9 years now, working the caves and mountains of Chattahoochee National Forest in northern Georgia. When people hear what I do for a living, they always ask the same thing. Aren't you scared down there in those dark holes? I used to laugh at that question. Used to. See, I grew up spelunking with my daddy in these same mountains. Started when I was 8 years old, following him through passages so narrow I had to crawl on my belly. By the time I turned 16, I knew every major cave system from here to Tennessee, got my ranger certification at 24, and specialized in cave rescue. In 9 years, I've pulled 47 people out of underground trouble, lost hikers, injured climbers, even a few folks who got stuck trying to explore places they had no business being. My wife Sarah always worried about the job. She's a nurse at the county hospital, seen plenty of broken bones and worse from cave accidents. Soul, she'd say, one day you're going to find something down there that finds you first. I'd kiss her forehead and tell her the only monsters in caves were bears looking for a warm place to sleep. Blood Mountain sits like a giant's fist in the northern Georgia Appalachians. At 40,458 feet, it's the highest peak around, and the Cherokee called it Noonda Yee, the Bloody Mountain. Local folks say it got that name from some ancient battle, but I always figured it was just the way the rocks look red at sunset. The mountain's honeycombed with limestone caves. Some connect for miles underground, with rivers and chambers big enough to hide a church. Most tourists stick to the marked trails, but serious cavers come from all over the country to explore what we call the Blood Mountain system. I've mapped over 200 passages myself, each one tagged and recorded in our safety days. Tabase. November 1984 was colder than usual. First hard freeze came early, and ice was already forming in the shallow cave mouths. The deep systems stay warmer, usually around 55 degrees year-round, but even they felt different that month. Animals were acting strange, too. Saw a black bear running uphill in broad daylight like something had spooked it bad. That's when Tom Reeves called about his missing team. Tom ran a cave exploration group out of Atlanta, experienced folks who mapped systems for geological surveys. 3 of them had gone into Blood Mountain's main cave system on a routine mapping job. They were supposed to be back by sunset, but their camp was empty when Tom checked the next morning. Gear still there, trucks still parked at the trailhead. Like they'd just vanished. "Soul, these aren't weekend warriors," Tom said over the radio. "Jenny's been caving for 15 years. Mike knows those tunnels better than his own house. And Luis," Tom's voice cracked, "Luis is the best rope man I've ever seen. If something happened to all 3 of them..." I loaded my gear and headed up the mountain. 4 miles of hiking trail, then another mile of scrambling over loose rocks to reach the cave entrance. The whole way up, I kept thinking about what Sarah said. About finding something that finds you first. The main entrance to Blood Mountain Cave System sits in a natural depression surrounded by old-growth pines and mountain laurel. It's a horizontal opening, about 8 feet high and 12 feet wide. Big enough to drive a small truck through if you had a mind to. Most caves start narrow and open up inside, but this one does the opposite. Gets tighter the deeper you go, like the mountains swallowing you slow. I set up my communications gear at the entrance and radioed base camp. Standard procedure. Every 30 minutes, I'd check in with my location and status. Louise Blackstone, my partner for the last 3 years, would monitor from her position at the cave mouth. Louise knew caves better than anyone in Georgia. She'd started exploring before I was born and had pulled more people out of tight spots than the rest of us combined. "So, you reading anything unusual on the air quality?" Louise asked through my headset. I checked my equipment. Carbon dioxide normal, oxygen good. No sign of bad air that might have overwhelmed the missing team. "All green, Louise, I'm heading in." The first 100 yards looked normal. Tom's team had followed proper procedure. guideline rope properly anchored, route markers every 20 feet, even initials carved in soft spots to mark their passage. Their lights had left the usual scuff marks on the limestone walls, and I could see boot prints in the mud patches. Then I noticed something that made my skin crawl. The walls were weeping, not the normal cave dampness you get from groundwater seepage. This was different. Red droplets, thick as blood, oozing from cracks in the limestone. At first I thought it might be iron oxide. Mineral deposits can look pretty strange underground. But when I touched it with my glove, it was warm. Cave walls are always cold. Always. I took a sample in a plastic container and kept moving. The guideline led deeper into the mountain, through a passage that curved left and started sloping down. My headlamp beam seemed dimmer than usual, like the light was being absorbed by something in the air. And that's when I noticed the smell. Not the musty, earthy scent of normal caves. This was organic. Sweet and rotten, like meat left too long in summer heat. "Louise, you getting my transmission?" Static answered me for a few seconds before her voice crackled through. "Copy, Saul. What's your location?" "About 300 yards in, following their rope line. Louise, something's not right down here. Walls are bleeding some kind of red substance, and it's warm to the touch. Could be thermal activity. You know there's hot springs throughout these mountains." I wanted to believe that, but hot springs don't smell like death. The passage opened into what we called Cathedral Chamber, a room about 60 feet across with a domed ceiling that disappeared into darkness above. Tom's team had set up a temporary base camp here, battery-powered lights, coiled rope, surveying equipment scattered on the flat rocks. Everything was covered in the same red substance I'd been seeing on the walls. But that wasn't the worst part. Their climbing rope, rated for 2,000 pounds of weight, had been shredded. Not cut. Shredded. Like something with claws the size of kitchen knives had grabbed it and twisted. I knelt down and examined the tears in the nylon. Whatever did this had incredible strength. The rope ends were dissolved, like they'd been dipped in acid. "Saul, your signal's getting weak. Status report." I keyed my radio 3 times. The signal for trouble, but okay. Then I picked up one of the team's flashlights. The lens was cracked, but it still worked. When I switched it on, the beam glowed red instead of white. That's when I heard the scraping. The sound came from deeper in the cave system, where the cathedral chamber narrows into 3 separate passages. Scraping, like something large dragging itself across stone. It echoed in ways that made it impossible to tell which tunnel it was coming from. I drew my sidearm. Park rangers carry them for bears and dangerous wildlife, though I'd never had to use mine underground. My hands were shaking as I checked the safety and chambered around. "Saul, you missed your check-in. What's your 20? Louise's voice sounded far away, full of static. I looked at my watch and couldn't believe it. 45 minutes had passed since my last radio call, but it felt like 10 minutes. Time moves funny in deep caves sometimes, but not like this. "I'm in Cathedral Chamber. Found their base camp." "Louise." I paused, trying to figure out how to explain what I was seeing. "Their equipment's been destroyed. Ropes shredded like something with claws got hold of it. And there's this red substance covering everything." "Red substance?" "Like blood, but it's seeping from the cave walls, warm to the touch. And Louise, the caves are too warm down here. Should be 55 degrees, but I'm sweating." The scraping sound came again, longer this time. Definitely from the middle passage, the one that led to what we called the deep rooms, a series of chambers that dropped nearly 800 feet below ground level. I followed Tom's team's guideline into the middle tunnel. The red seepage was worse here, running down the walls like the mountain was bleeding from 1,000 cuts. My boots squelched in puddles of the stuff, and wherever it touched my equipment, the metal started looking tarnished. The passage curved right and opened into a smaller chamber we'd never fully mapped. Tom's team had strung lights here too, but half of them were dead. The ones still working cast everything in a hellish red glow. That's where I found Jenny. She was pressed against the far wall like she'd been trying to melt into the stone. Her eyes were open, staring at something I couldn't see. When I got closer, I realized she wasn't breathing. But she wasn't dead either. Not exactly. Her skin had a waxy, translucent look, and when I touched her neck to check for a pulse, she was warm. Too warm. Her flesh felt soft, like it was dissolving from the inside. And where the red cave moisture had touched her, her clothes were eaten away in perfect holes. "Jenny?" I whispered. "Jenny, can you hear me?" Her eyes moved to focus on me, and her mouth opened. No sound came out, but I could see her tongue was gone, dissolved like the rope. I stumbled backward, my heart hammering against my ribs. This wasn't possible. People don't just melt. But as I watched, more of the red substance oozed from cracks in the wall above her, dripping onto her face and shoulders. Where it hit, her skin bubbed, bled, and hissed like acid on metal. "Saul! Saul, respond!" Louise's voice cut through my panic. I keyed the radio with trembling fingers. "Louise, I found Jenny. She's... Jesus, Louise, she's alive, but something's dissolving her. The red stuff, it's acid, strong acid. Get out of there, now. That's an order." I wanted to run. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to get away from this place. But Mike and Louise were still missing. And if they were somewhere in this cave system in the same condition as Jenny... The scraping sound echoed through the chamber again, and this time I saw what was making it. The wall behind Jenny was moving, not cracking or shifting like unstable rock, moving like something alive. The limestone bulged outward, then contracted, like the mountain was breathing. And where it moved, more of the red acid seeped out. I raised my flashlight, and the beam caught something that made my blood turn to ice water. There was a pattern in the wall, segments like a giant worm or centipede, each one the size of a car tire. The limestone wasn't limestone at all. It was something else, something that had been pretending to be rock. And as I watched, one of the segments shifted, revealing what looked like a massive eye the size of a dinner plate, filmed over with the same red substance that was dissolving Jenny alive. The thing was part of the cave system itself. How long had it been here? How long had cavers been walking through passages that were actually the body of something enormous and alien? Jenny's mouth moved again, and this time sound came out. A wet, gurgling whisper. "Run!" The wall exploded outward. Chunks of fake limestone flew everywhere as something impossible emerged from what I'd thought was solid rock. It moved like a snake, but it was segmented like an insect, covered in acid-weeping skin that looked like wet stone. Each segment was easily 6 feet across, and I could see dozens of them flowing out of the wall like a living avalanche. I ran. Behind me, the thing's movement sounded like a landslide mixed with the hiss of acid, eating through metal. My headlamp beam bounced wildly as I sprinted through the narrow passage, following my own footprints back toward Cathedral Chamber. The red substance was flowing faster now, running down the walls in rivers, pooling on the cave floor and eating through my boot soles. "Louise! Louise! The whole cave system is alive. It's some kind of massive creature, and it's been pretending to be rock." Static was my only answer. I reached Cathedral Chamber and grabbed the rope I'd used to rappel down from the upper level. The thing was right behind me. I could hear it scraping through the passage, too big for the tunnel but forcing its way through anyway. The walls were cracking as it moved, real limestone mixing with its acid-bleeding segments. My rope was already starting to dissolve where the red substance had dripped on it, but I clipped in anyway and started climbing. Below me, the creature flowed into Cathedral Chamber like a flood of living rock. In the glow of my headlamp, I could see it had no real head or tail. Just segment after segment of stone-colored flesh, each one weeping acid that dissolved everything it touched. And scattered throughout those segments were things that looked like eyes, but bigger than any eye had a right to be. They were tracking my movement as I climbed. I was 20 feet up the rope when it started to snap. The acid had eaten through half the fibers, and my weight was finishing the job. I managed to grab a handhold on the real cave wall just as the rope parted, sending me swinging into a narrow crevice. The creature flowed up the wall after me like it was flat ground. This thing didn't just live in the caves, it was the caves. How many passages in Blood Mountain were actually its body? How many cavers over the years had walked through its stomach without knowing it? I squeezed through the crevice, scraping skin off my knees, knuckles and elbows, and came out in a passage I didn't recognize. The walls here were clean limestone, no red seepage, but I could hear the thing behind me, forcing its bulk through spaces too small for it, dissolving rock with its acid blood to make room. My radio crackled. "Saul, hear me. Out of there. Louise, I'm in the upper passages, but I don't know which ones. The creature's right behind me. It's huge, bigger than anything that should be able to live underground. And Louise, Jenny's dead, dissolved by acid. Saul, coordinates, sending help." The signal was breaking up, but I caught enough to know Louise was trying to get rescue teams up the mountain. Fat lot of good that would do. What were they going to fight this thing with? Harsh language. I kept moving through unfamiliar passages, following air currents toward what I hoped was another entrance. Behind me, the scraping and hissing grew louder. The creature wasn't just following me, it was herding me, blocking off passages that led toward the main entrance, forcing me deeper into its domain. That's when I found Mike. Mike was in what looked like a feeding chamber. The room was perfectly round, about 30 feet across, with walls that pulsed like the inside of a throat. Mike hung suspended in the center, wrapped in something that looked like spider silk, but felt warm and wet to the touch. He was still alive, still conscious, but his legs below the knee were gone, dissolved. The red acid was working on him slowly, keeping him alive while it ate him from the bottom up. "Saul?" His voice was weak, but his eyes focused on me. "Saul, you gotta get out of here. This thing, it's been here forever." The Cherokee knew. They knew, and they tried to warn people, but nobody listened. I pulled out my knife and started cutting through the cocoon material. It was tough, like leather, but the blade went through. "I'm getting you out, Mike. Where's Luis?" "Luis is gone. Thing got him first. Saul, listen to me. This creature's been feeding on cavers for decades, maybe longer. Every time someone goes, missing in these mountains, every cave-in that traps people where we never find the bodies, it's been feeding." The cocoon material was dissolving my knife blade, but I kept cutting. Mike dropped to the cave floor, his stumps bleeding, but not as much as they should have been. The acid had cauterized the wounds as it ate through flesh and bone. "Can you walk? Can you move at all?" Mike shook his head. "Leave me. It's coming back, and if you're here when it arrives, we're both done. Saul, there's something else. Something worse." The chamber walls were pulsing faster, and I could hear the creature moving through passages all around us. How big was this thing? The segments I'd seen in the other chamber might have been just a small part of it. For all I knew, half the mountain could be alive. "What's worse than this?" Mike grabbed my arm with surprising strength. "It's not alone. There's more of them, connected underground. A whole network. They communicate, Saul. They share information. And they're hungry. Hungrier than they've been in decades." The scraping sound was getting closer. I could feel vibrations in the cave floor like a freight train approaching. Whatever this thing was, it was moving fast through its own body, using passages I couldn't see. "Mike, I can't leave you here. You have to. Tell people, Saul. Tell them what's under these mountains. Don't let anyone else come down here." The chamber entrance erupted in a shower of dissolved limestone and acid-bleeding flesh. The creature flowed in like a wave of living rock, its massive eye spots fixed on me. This close, I could see it wasn't just one organism. It was colonial, like a coral reef, made up of millions of smaller creatures working together to form something impossible. I emptied my pistol into the nearest segment. The bullets punched through its stone-like hide, releasing gouts of red acid that ate through the chamber floor. The thing didn't even slow down. It flowed over Mike like water, covering him completely. I heard him scream once before the sound was muffled by living stone. Then silence, except for the hiss of acid eating through bone. I ran again, this time with no plan except to put distance between myself and that feeding chamber. The passages were changing around me, walls shifting to block routes and open new ones. The creature was reshaping its own body to control where I went. It was playing with me. My radio crackled again. Saul, position, mountains unstable, seismic activity. Seismic activity. Of course. Every time this thing moved, every time it reconfigured the cave system, it would register as small earthquakes. How long had geologists been detecting its movement and calling it natural? I found myself in another chamber, this one filled with what looked like stalactites and stalagmites. But when I got closer, I realized they weren't limestone formations. They were bones. Hundreds of them, maybe thousands, all partially dissolved, but still recognizable. Rib cages the size of oil drums, skulls that might have been human once, before the acid got to them. And scattered among the bone formations, pieces of equipment, helmets, ropes, lights, all eaten half away. This was the creature's larder. Decades of victims, stored and preserved in acid until it was hungry enough to finish digesting them. A sound behind me made me spin around. Not the scraping of the creature's movement. Footsteps. Luis walked out of a side passage, his caving gear intact, his headlamp working perfectly. He looked exactly like he had when Tom described him. The best rope man in Georgia, experienced and competent. Saul, thank God you're here. I've been lost in these tunnels for hours. Relief flooded through me. At least one member of the team was still alive, saying, ill unhurt. Luis, how did you avoid the creature? How are you not dissolved like the others? Luis smiled, and that's when I noticed his eyes. They were solid black, like pools of acid, and when he opened his mouth to speak, red liquid poured out. What creature, Saul? The thing wearing Luis's shape took a step toward me, its feet making wet, squelching sounds on the cave floor. As it moved, I could see through its fake skin to the segments underneath, the same stone-textured flesh as the creature in the feeding chamber. The mountain has been hungry, Saul. So very hungry. But you taste like fear. Fear is the best seasoning. I backed away, my empty gun still in my hand. You're not Luis. No, the thing agreed, still wearing Luis's face but speaking in a voice like grinding stone. Luis was delicious. Jenny, too. Mike lasted the longest. His fear was particularly sweet. But you, Saul, you've been mapping our body for years, walking through our passages, marking our chambers. We know you. We've been waiting for you. Behind the Luis thing, more shapes emerged from the bone formations. Cavers I recognized from old missing person reports, a family of hikers who'd vanished 3 years ago, all of them with black eyes and red liquid running from their mouths. We are hungry, Saul, and you are going to help us feed. The fake people moved toward me in perfect unison, their movements too coordinated to be human. I grabbed a sharp piece of bone, part of someone's femur, and held it like a club. Stay back. They kept coming. The Luis thing reached for me with hands that were already starting to dissolve back into segments of living stone. I swung the bone club and connected with its face. The impact sent shock waves up my arms like hitting concrete, but the thing's head caved in with a wet crunch. Red acid sprayed everywhere. Where it hit my jacket, the fabric dissolved instantly. Drops that landed on my hands burned like fire, eating through skin down to muscle in seconds. I screamed and stumbled backward, right into the arms of something else. This one looked like Jenny, but with black eyes and a mouth that opened too wide, revealing rows of teeth like broken glass. Saul, it whispered in Jenny's voice, we've been waiting so long to taste you. I drove the bone club up into its throat and twisted. More acid sprayed out, but I kept twisting until the fake head came loose from the neck. The body collapsed into a pile of stone segments, each one writhing and trying to reform. The other fake people were closing in. I ran for what looked like an exit passage, but the walls started closing like a throat swallowing. The creature was reshaping itself around me, trying to trap me in a space too small to move. I squeezed through just as the passage snapped shut behind me, the living walls coming together with a sound like breaking bones. My radio crackled one more time. Saul, if you can hear, Getting out. Whole mountains coming down. Louise's voice cut through the static, faint but clear. She was telling rescue teams to evacuate. The creature's movement was destabilizing the real geological structures of the mountain. I found myself in a passage that sloped upward. Real limestone walls, no red seepage, air moving toward what I hoped was the surface. But behind me I could hear the creature flowing through its own body, hunting me through passages that existed only when it wanted them to. How do you fight something that is the environment you're fighting it in? How do you escape from the inside of a living mountain? I was about to find out. The passage led to a chamber I'd never seen before, natural limestone carved by millions of years of water flow. But it wasn't empty. Emergency oxygen tanks were stacked against one wall. Old ones, the kind cave rescue teams used in the 1970s. Someone else had been here before, someone who'd known they might need to stay underground for a long time. I checked the tanks. 3. Each of them still had pressure. Not much, but enough. On the wall next to the tanks, scratched into the stone with something sharp, was a message. It sleeps for decades, wakes when disturbed. Fire makes it retreat. J. Crow Feather, 1963. J. Crow Feather. I'd heard that name before, in stories the local Cherokee elders told about Blood Mountain. He'd been a cave guide, taken people into the mountain to show them formations and underground rivers. Then he'd vanished, like so many others. But he'd figured it out. 20 years ago, he'd discovered what lived under Blood Mountain. And he'd tried to leave a warning. Fire makes it retreat. The oxygen tanks weren't just for breathing. They were weapons. I unscrewed the valve on the first tank and let pure oxygen hiss into the chamber. The stuff was invisible, but it would turn any flame into an inferno. Then I pulled out my emergency flare, the kind cave rescuers carry for signaling. The scraping sound was getting closer. Through cracks in the chamber walls, I could see red seepage starting to flow. The creature had found me again. "Saul!" a voice called from the passage I'd just climbed through. It sounded like Sarah, my wife. "Saul, honey, I'm here to help you. I brought the other rangers." I knew it wasn't really Sarah. She was safe at the hospital in town, probably wondering why I hadn't called to check in. But hearing her voice, even distorted by acid and hunger, made something break inside my chest. "You don't get to use her voice," I said to the darkness. "You don't get to pretend to be someone I love." The fake Sarah walked into the chamber, and it was perfect. Every detail exactly right. Her long brown hair, the way she held her left shoulder slightly higher than her right from an old nursing school injury, even the engagement ring I'd saved 6 months to buy her. "Saul, what are you talking about? It's me. The other teams are right behind me. We're here to get you out." Behind fake Sarah, more shapes moved in the passage. Fake Louise, fake park rangers, even fake Tom from the caving group. All of them with black eyes and red liquid dripping from their mouths. "We know you, Saul," fake Sarah said, her voice loving and concerned. "We know how much you care about people. How you can't leave someone behind. That's why we chose these faces. That's why you're going to let us get close enough to touch you." I struck the flare. The chamber exploded into light and heat as pure oxygen turned a simple emergency flare into a blowtorch. The fake people shrieked and stumbled backward, their stolen faces melting like wax in the sudden inferno. But it wasn't enough. There were too many of them, and the fire wouldn't last long. I grabbed the second oxygen tank and opened its valve wide, then threw it at the cluster of fake people. The tank bounced off fake Sarah's chest and rolled into the passage beyond, hissing oxygen into the confined space. Then I struck my second flare and threw it after the tank. The explosion shook the entire mountain. Fire roared through the passages like a dragon's breath, fed by pure oxygen and decades of accumulated organic matter. The fake people vanished in the flames, their stolen shapes dissolving back into segments of stone-colored flesh that writhed and burned. The creature's scream was like the sound of a mountain falling down. It came from everywhere at once, the walls, the ceiling, the floor beneath my feet. A sound of pain and rage that went on, shaking loose rocks from the chamber ceiling. This was the first time in decades, maybe centuries, that anything had heard it. Passages that had been solid rock moments before split open, revealing the creature's true anatomy. I was standing inside something vast beyond comprehension, a colonial organism that had grown through the mountain's limestone like a cancer, replacing stone with living flesh over hundreds of years. And now it was burning from the inside. I ran toward what looked like a nachu, rail fissure in the rock, a crack leading upward that hadn't been there minutes before. The creature was convulsing, reshaping itself in agony, and its movement was opening real geological fractures in the mountain. Behind me, the fire spread through passages I'd walked through safely just hours before. The oxygen I'd released was feeding the flames, turning what should have been a brief flare into a sustained inferno. And wherever the fire touched the creature's flesh, it burned like fat, releasing thick black smoke that reeked of digested meat. The fissure was narrow, barely wide enough for my shoulders, but it angled upward toward cooler air. I could smell pine trees and rain. The surface was somewhere above me. I wedged myself into the crack and started climbing, using my elbows and knees to inch upward through stone that vibrated with the creature's death throes. Below me, the screaming went on and on. 20 feet up the fissure, I could see gray light filtering down from above. Real daylight, not the red glow of acid-bleeding cave walls. I climbed faster, scraping skin off my arms and legs, not caring about anything except reaching that light. The fissure opened onto a ledge halfway up Blood Mountain's eastern face. I crawled out into cold November air and lay gasping on real stone. Limestone that was actually limestone, not living flesh pretending to be rock. Below me, the mountain shuddered. Smoke poured from dozens of cave entrances as fire consumed the creature from within. Trees along the mountainside were falling as the ground shifted, real bedrock cracking as the dying organism's convulsions destabilized geological structures that had been stable for thousands of years. My radio crackled. "Saul, respond! We're reading massive seismic activity. The whole mountain's coming apart." "Louise," I gasped into the radio. "Louise, I'm on the eastern face, about halfway up. Send helicopters. And Louise, seal the caves, all of them. Use concrete, use dynamite, I don't care. Nothing can go back down there. Ever." "Sol, what happened? What did you find?" I looked back at the smoke pouring from the mountain and thought about Jenny dissolving against a cave wall, about Mike hanging in a feeding chamber, about fake people with black eyes and voices of the dead. I found what killed Tom's team. I found what's been killing cavers for decades. And I burned it alive. The helicopter found me 2 hours later, hypothermic and delirious, but alive. As they lifted me off the mountain, I could see the damage below. Dozens of cave entrances had collapsed. Trees were down for acres around the main cave system, and from every fissure and crack, black smoke continued to pour out, carrying the smell of burning meat up into the clean mountain air. They took me to the county hospital, where Sarah was waiting with a cup of coffee and tears running down her face. I tried to tell her what I'd found under Blood Mountain, but she just held my hand and told me I was safe now. The official report blamed the cave-ins on unstable geology triggered by small earthquakes. Tom's missing team was listed as lost in the collapse, their bodies irretrievable. The cave system was permanently sealed with concrete barriers. But I knew the truth. And sometimes, late at night, I wondered if I'd really killed it, or just hurt it badly enough to make it sleep again. I quit the Park Service 6 months after Blood Mountain. Couldn't do it anymore. Couldn't walk into dark spaces without expecting the walls to start bleeding. Couldn't look at limestone formations without wondering if they were really rock or something else, something hungry, wearing rock's disguise. Sarah said it was PTSD from the cave-in, from losing Tom's team. She was right, but not in the way she thought. I'd seen something under that mountain that changed how I looked at the world. Made me understand that there are things sharing our planet we don't know about, things that have been here, were longer than humans, and will probably be here after we're gone. I took a job with the county sheriff's department. Patrol work, traffic stops, domestic disputes, problems I could solve. With handcuffs and paperwork, no more going underground, no more dark spaces where the walls might not be walls. Louise Blackstone quit too, about a year later. She'd been monitoring radio transmissions the day I went into Blood Mountain, and she'd heard things that didn't make it into any official report. Voices calling for help from people who'd been dead for years. Static that formed patterns like something was trying to communicate. She moved to Florida, took a job teaching scuba diving. At least in the ocean, she told me, you can see the monsters coming. But it wasn't over. Not really. 3 years after Blood Mountain, I got a call from a park ranger in Tennessee. Cave system near the Georgia border had been producing strange seismic readings. Cavers were reporting red seepage on cave walls, equipment being dissolved by unknown acids. 2 experienced spelunkers had gone missing, their rope shredded by something with claws. I drove up there on my day off and talked to the local rangers. Showed them what I'd learned about emergency oxygen tanks and fire. Told them about colonial organisms that could mimic rock formations. They listened politely and filed my information under helpful citizen input. 2 weeks later, that cave system was sealed with concrete. Official reason, unstable geology. I started keeping track. Over the next 5 years, 17 cave systems across the Appalachians were permanently closed due to geological instability. Always the same pattern, red seepage, dissolved equipment, missing cavers. Always the same official response, concrete barriers and silence. The Cherokee elders I talked to weren't surprised. They'd known about what they called the Hungry Mountains for generations. Their ancestors had marked certain caves as forbidden, places where the earth itself could eat you. But white settlers had ignored the warnings, just like modern cavers ignored the stories. The mountains are old, Saul, one elder told me. Older than our people, older than any people. They remember when the world was different, when things lived in the deep places that don't live there anymore. Except some of them never left. They just learned to hide better. I married Sarah the next year. We moved to a house in town, flat land with a basement that's only 6 feet deep. She knows I don't like talking about Blood Mountain, doesn't ask why I won't go camping or spelunking with her friends. She's seen me wake up screaming from dreams where the walls are breathing, where familiar voices call to me from passages that shouldn't exist. But sometimes, during heavy rainstorms, the chemical burns I got from the creature's acid start to weep again. Red droplets that smell like the deep caves that burn through whatever they touch. Sarah thinks it's just scar tissue reacting to barometric pressure, and I let her believe that, because the truth is worse than she could handle. The truth is that the red liquid weeping from my scars isn't just scar tissue. It's the same substance that was dissolving Jenny against that cave wall. Somehow, some part of that creature is still inside me, still alive, still hungry. And during storms, when the barometric pressure drops and the ancient things in the deep places feel the pull of weather systems above ground, it responds. I've tested it. The red droplets that seep from my burns will dissolve metal, just like the acid in Blood Mountain Cave. They eat through cloth, through wood, through anything organic they touch. And sometimes late at night when the pain is worst, I can hear something whispering in a language that sounds like grinding stone. It's telling me where the other colonies are hidden, where the hungry mountains wait for more cavers to venture into passages that aren't really passages at all. I keep a detailed map now, marking every cave system that gets sealed, every geological survey that reports unusual seismic activity in limestone regions. The pattern is spreading. Whatever I did to the creature under Blood Mountain didn't kill it. It just forced it to wake up others, to call to colonies that had been sleeping for decades. The Appalachians stretch from Georgia to Maine. Millions of acres of mountains, thousands of cave systems, limestone formations that could hide things older than human civilization. And somewhere in that vast underground network, colonial organisms the size of mountains are stirring, remembering what it feels like to be hungry. Sarah wants to have children. She's been dropping hints for months, talking about baby names and nursery colors. But how can I bring a child into a world where the ground itself might be alive and hunting? How do I explain to a son or daughter that there are places on Earth where the very stones have teeth? I've written it all down. Everything that happened under Blood Mountain, everything I learned about the creature and how to fight it. The information is sealed in a safe deposit box, along with instructions to release it if anything happens to me. If I disappear, If I'm found dissolved in some cave system where I had no business being, at least someone will know the truth, because I'm going back. Not to Blood Mountain. That colony is dead, or at least dormant. But there are others. The whispers in my scars have shown me maps of tunnels that stretch for hundreds of miles, connecting feeding chambers in mountains from Virginia to Alabama. And in those chambers, wrapped in acid silk cocoons, people are being kept alive and digested slowly, while colonial organisms wearing familiar faces hunt for more prey. Tom's team was just the beginning. How many cavers go missing every year in the Appalachians? How many hikers vanish without a trace? The official numbers don't include the people who are taken by things that shouldn't exist, because officially, those things don't exist. But I know they do, and I know how to hurt them. Fire and oxygen, emergency flares, and pure O2. It's not much, but it's something. And if I can find their main feeding chambers, if I can hit them hard enough while they're dormant. Sarah thinks I'm planning a camping trip with some old ranger buddies. She's packed me sandwiches and kissed me goodbye like she has 100 times before. She doesn't know I'm carrying enough emergency flares to burn down a mountain. She doesn't know the camping gear includes industrial oxygen tanks and thermite charges I bought from a demolition company. She doesn't know I'm probably not coming home. Because some caves are stomachs, not passages, and someone has to make sure the hungry mountains learn to fear us as much as we've learned to fear them. My name is Solomon Driftwood, and I used to think monsters were just bears denning in dark spaces. I was wrong about a lot of things. But I'm right about this. Whatever lives under those mountains has been feeding on us for too long. It's time we fed it something else. It's time we fed it fire. My name is Tobias Grimm, but everyone calls me Toby. I've been a forest ranger for 11 years now, working the mountains of West Virginia in the Monongahela National Forest. Before that, I taught third grade for 14 years. People always ask me why I switched jobs. I tell them I wanted to teach kids about nature instead of math. But the real reason is simpler. I love helping families have safe, happy times in the woods. I'm good at my job. Really good. In 25 years of working with children, I never lost a single kid. Not one. Parents trust me with their most precious things, and I take that seriously. I know every trail, every dangerous spot, every place where a curious 8-year-old might wander off. I carry a first aid kit, backup radio, and enough supplies to handle any emergency. That's why what happened at Witch Hollow still keeps me awake at night. July 1982 was hotter than usual. The kind of heat that makes the air thick and hard to breathe, even under the shade of the big hemlock trees. I was running a summer camp program for local families, teaching kids about forest safety, showing them how to identify plants, how to read animal tracks. Good, safe stuff that would help them love the outdoors. Witch Hollow got its name about 200 years ago. The old-timers say a witch lived there who would steal children and replace them with something else. Something that looked like your child but wasn't. The locals called these fake children changelings. Of course, I never believed any of that. I'm a practical man. Shape-shifting witches were just stories people made up to explain why children sometimes died from disease or accidents they didn't understand. The hollow itself sits about 12 miles from the nearest town, connected by a single dirt road that washes out every time it rains hard. Dense hemlock groves block out most of the sunlight. Then at noon, hidden springs bubble up from underground, and if you know where to look, you can find old stone circles that nobody talks about much. The Cherokee used to live here, and some say there are burial mounds scattered through the woods. I'd been avoiding Witch Hollow for years, not because of the stories, because it was too isolated. If something went wrong, help was too far away. But the state wanted me to expand the youth programs, and there were some beautiful camping spots in the hollow that families kept asking about. So I gave in. I planned a 3-day camping trip for 12 families with kids between 6 and 12 years old. We'd hike the trails, learn about the local wildlife, and sleep under the stars. What could go wrong? The first day went perfectly. The kids were excited, the parents were relaxed, and the weather was beautiful. We set up camp near a clear stream, roasted hot dogs for dinner, and told stories around the fire. I pointed out constellations and taught them which sounds meant friendly forest animals and which ones to be careful of. That night, the temperature dropped 30 degrees without warning. The kids needed extra blankets, and parents had to zip their sleeping bags tight. Strange for July, but mountain weather can be unpredictable. The next morning, I noticed 8-year-old Billy Morrison was acting different. Billy had been a normal kid the day before, curious, a little shy, asked good questions about the trees and animals. His parents, Tom and Sarah Morrison, were first-time campers, and they'd brought Billy hoping to get him interested in hiking. But the Billy I saw at breakfast wasn't the same boy. This Billy sat perfectly still while the other kids ran around and played. When I asked him about the wildlife we'd seen yesterday, he answered in a flat voice, telling me things about the forest that no 8-year-old should be know. He talked about which trees were oldest, which springs never froze in winter, and where the Cherokee used to bury their dead. "How do you know all that, Billy?" I asked. He looked at me with eyes that seemed too old for his face. "The hollow tells me things." His parents didn't seem to notice anything wrong. Sarah Morrison just smiled and said, "Billy's always been a smart boy. He reads a lot." But I'd worked with hundreds of kids. This wasn't smart. This was something else. When I tried to take pictures of the group with my Polaroid camera, the photos came out strange. Every shot with Billy in it was blurred or distorted, like something was moving even when he stood still. The other kids looked normal, but Billy appeared as a dark smudge. I checked my camera. It worked fine on pictures without Billy. At lunch, I noticed the animals acting weird around him. Squirrels that had been begging for food scraps the day before ran away when Billy approached. Birds went quiet when he walked under their trees. Even the family dog, a friendly golden retriever named Max, whined and hid behind Tom Morrison's legs whenever Billy came near. "Is Billy feeling okay?" I asked Sarah quietly. "Sometimes kids act different when they're not feeling well." "He seems fine to me," she said. "Maybe a little tired from all the fresh air." But Billy didn't look tired. He looked empty, like someone had hollowed him out and was wearing his skin. That afternoon, we went on a nature walk. I was showing the kids how to identify poison ivy when Billy wandered off the trail. By the time I noticed and went after him, he was standing in a grove of hemlock trees about 50 yards away. "Billy, come back here," I called. He didn't move. He was staring down at something on the ground. When I reached him, I saw what had caught his attention. A small pile of clothes, child-sized clothes, half buried under fallen leaves and pine needles, a red t-shirt, tiny sneakers, underwear. All too small for any of the kids in our group, but they looked fresh, like they'd been there for only a few days. "Billy, what are you doing? Come on back to the group." He looked up at me with those strange old eyes. "Someone lost their clothes," he said calmly. "Yeah, looks like it. We should get back now." As we walked away, I looked back at Billy. He was walking normal, but something about his footprints in the soft earth made me stop. I knelt down to get a closer look. Billy's footprints showed 6 toes on each foot. I blinked hard and looked again. 5 toes. Normal feet. I shook my head. The heat must be getting to me. That evening, after the families had gone to bed, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about those clothes in the woods, Billy's strange behavior, the way the animals avoided him. I decided to take a walk around the camp just to check on things. The moon was almost full, bright enough to see without a flashlight. Everything was quiet except for the normal forest sounds, owls, insects, small animals moving through the underbrush. Then I heard humming. It was coming from the direction of the hemlock grove where we'd found the clothes. A child's voice, humming an old song I didn't recognize. The melody was sad and haunting, like something you might hear at a funeral. I grabbed my flashlight and followed the sound. The humming led me deeper into the woods than any of our kids should have been able to go alone. The trees grew thicker here, blocking out most of the moonlight. My flashlight beam danced across gnarled trunks and hanging branches. Finally, I found the source of the humming. Billy Morrison was standing in a small clearing, perfectly still, humming that strange song. But he wasn't alone. 3 other children from our group stood with him. Jenny Walsh, age 7, Marcus Chen, age 9, and little Amy Rodriguez, age 6. All 4 kids stood in a perfect circle, holding hands, humming together in harmony. "Hey, kids, what are you doing out here?" They turned to look at me, moving in perfect unison, like they were connected by invisible strings. In the flashlight beam, their eyes reflected the light like animal eyes do. "We're learning the old songs," Billy said in that flat, empty voice. "The hollow is teaching us," added Jenny, though her voice sounded different too. Older, raspier. "You need to get back to camp right now," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "Your parents are going to be very worried." They didn't argue. They just turned and walked back toward camp, still moving in that synchronized way that made my skin crawl. I followed them back, watching as they slipped quietly into their family tents. I stood guard for the rest of the night, but everything stayed quiet. In the morning, I asked each set of parents if their kids had left their tents during the night. "Oh no," said Mrs. Walsh. "Jenny slept like a rock. She's always been a heavy sleeper." The other parents said the same thing. Their children had never left their tents, but I knew what I'd seen. The third day started with more strangeness. All 4 kids, Billy, Jenny, Marcus, and Amy, were acting like different people. They spoke in old-fashioned ways, using words like reckon and might could that sounded like something from 100 years ago. They knew things about the forest that even I didn't know. When Marcus pointed out a hidden cave I'd never seen before, I asked him how he knew about it. "Been here before," he said simply. "When?" "This is your first time camping in Witch Hollow." He looked confused for a moment, like he was trying to remember something. Then he shrugged. Must have dreamed it. But his parents, David and Lisa Chen, insisted Marcus had never been camping anywhere before this trip. I decided to test something. I asked Jenny to show me where the old Cherokee burial grounds were located. No 8-year-old should know that information. It wasn't on any maps or trail guides. Without hesitation, she led me to a small hill covered with ancient-looking stones arranged in careful patterns. The stones were covered with moss and looked like they'd been there for centuries. "How did you know about this place, Jenny?" "The grandmother told me," she said. "What grandmother?" "The one who lives in the hollow. She teaches us things." I felt cold despite the heat. "What kind of things?" Jenny smiled. But it wasn't a child's smile. It was knowing and cruel. Old things, secret things, how to walk between the trees without making sound, how to call the animals, how to change. "Change what?" "Everything," she whispered. That afternoon, I made an excuse to take one of the kids back to town for medical supplies. Really, I wanted to call for help, maybe get some of the children checked out by a doctor. Something was very wrong, and I was starting to think it might be some kind of poisoning or infection affecting their behavior. I chose Billy because he'd been acting strange the longest. Tom Morrison agreed to come with us, though he still insisted Billy was fine. The drive to town was quiet. Billy sat in the back seat, staring out the window with those 2 old eyes. Every few minutes I glanced at him in the rearview mirror. At the clinic, Dr. Sarah Hendricks examined Billy thoroughly. Temperature normal, reflexes normal, no signs of illness or injury. But when she tried to take his picture for her records, the same thing happened as with my Polaroid. The image was blurred and distorted. "Strange," Dr. Hendricks muttered. "Must be something wrong with the camera." She tried again with a different camera. Same result. While Tom was talking to the doctor, I pulled Billy aside. "Billy, I need you to tell me the truth. Do you remember coming to Witch Hollow with your parents?" He nodded. "Do you remember the first day we were there? Playing games, roasting hot dogs?" He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Sometimes I remember things that feel like dreams. A woman with long gray hair. She smells like dirt and old leaves. She shows me things." "What kind of things?" "How to be someone else." My blood went cold. "What do you mean?" But Tom Morrison came, back then, and Billy went quiet. On the drive back to camp, I kept glancing at Billy in the mirror. Once, just for a second, I could have sworn I saw an old woman's face looking back at me instead of a little boy's. When we got back to Witch Hollow, the other 3 changed children were waiting for us. They stood in a line at the edge of camp, perfectly still, watching our car approach. As Billy got out, they all smiled at the same time. That evening, I tried to convince the parents that something was wrong. I showed them the blurred photographs, told them about the strange things their kids were saying and doing. "Kids have active imaginations," Tom Morrison said. "Billy's just being creative." "Maybe the altitude is affecting them," suggested Lisa Chen, making them a little dizzy or confused. Nobody wanted to believe their child had changed. Maybe parents never do. But Betty Ashbrook, the camp nurse who'd come along to help with the program, pulled me aside after dinner. "Toby, I've been watching those 4 kids all day. I don't know what's wrong, but you're right. Something's not normal." "What do you think it is?" "I don't know. But I've been a pediatric nurse for 20 years, and those children are not the same kids who came here 3 days ago. I'd stake my career on it." That night, I decided to follow the children if they left their tents again. I pretended to go to sleep but kept my clothes on and my flashlight ready. Around midnight, I heard the tent zippers opening. I waited a few minutes, then crept outside. In the moonlight, I could see 4 small figures walking toward the hemlock grove. I followed at a distance, trying to stay hidden. They led me deeper into the woods than before, to a place where the trees grew so thick they blocked out the moon completely. I had to use my flashlight, keeping the beam low and covered with my fingers. The children stopped in a clearing where ancient stones formed a perfect circle. The stones were carved with symbols I didn't recognize, spirals, twisted shapes that hurt to look at directly. In the center of the circle sat an old wooden doll, crudely made but somehow disturbing. As I watched, Billy approached the doll and knelt beside it. "We brought you another offering, grandmother," he said in that flat, empty voice. He pulled something from his pocket, a lock of hair. Not his hair. This was brown and curly, like little Amy Rodriguez's hair. The other children formed a circle around Billy and the doll. They began to hum that same haunting melody I'd heard before, but now it was louder, more complex, like a song with many parts. As they hummed, the doll began to move. It turned its carved head toward me, though I was hidden in the trees at least 30 feet away. Its painted eyes seemed to see right through the darkness and into my soul. The children stopped humming. "Someone's watching," Jenny said. They all turned to look directly at my hiding spot. Billy smiled, and for just a moment, his face wasn't the face of an 8-year-old boy. It was the face of an ancient woman, wrinkled, knowing, and cruel. "Hello, Ranger Grimm," he said in a voice like rustling leaves. "We've been waiting for you." I ran. I crashed through the woods, branches tearing at my clothes and face, not caring about the noise I was making. Behind me, I could hear laughter, not child laughter, but the crackling laugh of something very old and very cruel. When I reached camp, I was gasping and bleeding from dozens of small cuts. The families were still asleep in their tents, unaware that their children were in the woods performing some kind of ritual with an impossible doll. I grabbed my radio and tried to call for help, but all I got was static. I tried my emergency flare gun. Nothing. All my equipment had stopped working. I checked my watch. The hands were spinning wildly, like time itself had gone crazy. Then I heard footsteps. The 4 children walked back into camp, calm and quiet as ghosts. They slipped into their tents without a sound. Within minutes, I could hear their parents talking to them in sleepy voices, asking if they needed water or had to use the bathroom. Normal parent-child conversations, like nothing had happened. I sat by the dying campfire for the rest of the night, watching the tents, trying to figure out what to do. In the morning, I would get everyone packed up and out of Witch Hollow, even if I had to make up a story about bad weather or dangerous animals. But morning brought new horrors. When the families emerged from their tents, all 12 children were acting strange. Not just the original 4, all of them. They moved in that synchronized way, spoke in old-fashioned phrases, and looked at me with eyes that seemed far too knowing. "Beautiful morning, isn't it, Ranger Grimm?" said 6-year-old Amy Rodriguez in a voice like an old woman's. "The hollow is so peaceful. added 10-year-old Sarah Kim, who'd been normal just yesterday. We should stay longer, they all said together, in perfect unison. The parents didn't seem to notice anything wrong. They chatted happily about extending the camping trip, maybe staying another few days. The kids are having such a wonderful time, said Mrs. Walsh. Look how mature Jenny's acting. She's like a different child. That was exactly the problem. I made excuses and started packing the camp supplies. Weather forecast says rain, I lied. We need to get out before the road washes out. But when I went to start the camp van, the engine wouldn't turn over. I popped the hood and found that someone had cut through all the belts and hoses. The van wasn't going anywhere. Having trouble, Ranger Grimm? Billy Morrison appeared beside me, moving silently like a cat. Just some mechanical problems. Nothing I can't fix. He smiled that awful, knowing smile. The Hollow doesn't want us to leave ye. There's still so much to learn. Like what? Like how to be you. The words hit me like ice water. What do you mean? But Billy was already walking away, humming that strange song under his breath. I spent the day trying to fix the van while keeping an eye on the children. They had formed into groups and were playing games. But the games involved arranging sticks and stones in complex patterns, whispering in a language that sounded like no human tongue, and staring at me with calculating expressions. By evening, I realized the truth. The thing in Witch Hollow wasn't just taking the children. It was studying all of us, learning how we moved, how we talked, how we acted, getting ready to replace us completely. As the sun set, I gathered all the adults around the fire. I need everyone to listen very carefully, I said. Something is very wrong here. The children are not acting like themselves because they're not themselves anymore. Tom Morrison laughed. Come on, Toby. You're starting to sound like those old ghost stories. Look at your children, I said urgently. Really look at them. Are they the same kids you brought here 3 days ago? The parents glanced at their children, who were sitting in a perfect circle near the edge of camp, all staring at us with identical expressions. They seem fine to me, said David Chen, but his voice was uncertain now. When did Marcus learn to speak Cherokee? I asked. Cherokee? David looked confused. He was speaking it this afternoon. And Jenny? When did she become an expert on local history? Amy? When did she learn to identify animal tracks like a professional hunter? The parents looked at each other, worried now, but not ready to accept the impossible. There's something in these woods, I continued, something old that takes children and replaces them with copies. The locals call them changelings. That's ridiculous, louse, said Sarah Morrison, but she was staring at Billy now, really seeing him for the first time in days. That's when Billy stood up and smiled at us all. He's right, he said in a voice, like wind through dead leaves. But you figured it out too late. All 12 children stood up at once, moving in perfect synchronization. They arranged themselves in a circle around our campfire, trapping us in the middle. 300 years I've lived in this hollow, Billy continued, though his voice was changing now, becoming higher and more feminine. 300 years of taking what I need to stay alive. Usually just one child at a time, but you brought me so many. The child that looked like Billy began to change. His face aged rapidly, skin wrinkling, hair turning gray and thin. His small body stretched and bent until he was no longer a little boy, but a hunched old woman in tattered clothes. The Witch of Witch Hollow, she said, and smiled with teeth like broken glass. Your children are safe, for now. Their spirits rest in my keeping while I learn to wear their faces. But soon, I'll have no more use for the originals. The other children were changing too, all becoming slightly different versions of the same ancient woman. 12 bodies, one evil spirit. What do you want? I asked, though I already knew. To be young again, to walk in the world beyond this hollow. Your face will do nicely, Ranger Grimm. You know these woods. You're trusted by families with children. Think of all the little ones you could bring to me. She was right. As a forest ranger, I had access to hundreds of families, thousands of children. If she took my place, she could feed forever. Never, I said. The witch laughed, a sound like breaking branches. You don't have a choice. But as she spoke, I remembered something. Earlier that day, while exploring the woods, I'd found an old, abandoned cabin. Inside were rusty iron horseshoes, forgotten tools from some long-dead settler. Iron. The old stories always said iron could trap spirits, keep them from changing shape. The witch was still talking, explaining how she would steal my identity and use it to lure more victims. But I wasn't listening anymore. I was planning. "You're making one mistake," I told her. "What's that?" "You don't know me as well as you think." I pulled the iron horseshoe from my backpack. I'd grabbed it from the cabin as a curiosity, never thinking it might save my life. The witch's eyes went wide. All 12 versions of her stepped back at once. "Iron won't kill me," she hissed. "Only trap me for a while. That's all I need." I threw the horseshoe at the nearest child thing. It struck with a sound like thunder, and suddenly all 12 children collapsed to the ground, unconscious but breathing. The real battle was just beginning. The witch's spirit had been forced out of the children's bodies, but she wasn't gone. I could feel her presence in the woods around us, angry and searching for a way back. The parents were in shock, finally seeing their children as they really were, pale, thin, barely breathing. Whatever the witch had done to them, they were fading fast. "We need to get them to a hospital," Mrs. Walsh said, cradling Jenny's limp form. "No time," I said, "and no way to get them out. The van's still broken, and even if it wasn't, they won't survive the trip." I thought about everything I'd learned over the past 3 days. The stone circle, the wooden doll, the Cherokee burial grounds. The witch had been feeding off this place for 3 centuries. There had to be a way to break her connection to it. "Betty," I called to the camp nurse, "I need you to watch the children. If any of them stops breathing, start CPR immediately." "Where are you going?" "To end this." I grabbed my flashlight and headed for the hemlock grove. Behind me, I could hear the witch's voice calling from the darkness. "You can't save them all, Ranger Grimm, even if you break my hold on this plague. Some of them have been gone too long. Their spirits have begun to fade." She was trying to make me hurry, make me panic and make mistakes. But I'd been in the woods long enough to know that panic gets you killed. I found the stone circle where I'd seen the ritual. The wooden doll was still there, now surrounded by small offerings. Locks of hair, baby teeth, fingernail clippings, all taken from the children while they slept. I grabbed the doll and threw it as hard as I could against the largest stone. It shattered into pieces, and I heard a scream of rage echo through the forest. But it wasn't enough. The stones themselves were the real source of power. I remembered the iron horseshoe in my backpack. Iron disrupts spiritual energy, breaks magical connections. If I could place iron on each of the circle stones. I had 3 horseshoes from the abandoned cabin. Not enough for the whole circle, but maybe enough to weaken the witch's hold. As I placed the first horseshoe on a stone, the temperature dropped 20 degrees in seconds. Frost began forming on the ground despite the July heat. "Stop!" the witch's voice shrieked from everywhere at once. "You don't understand what you're doing!" "I understand perfectly," I said, placing the second horseshoe. "You're a parasite. You've been feeding off children for 300 years, and it ends tonight." The third horseshoe went onto the largest stone, the one at the center of the circle. The forest exploded with light. When my vision cleared, I was no longer alone. A Cherokee woman stood in the circle with me, elderly but strong, wearing traditional dress. Her presence felt warm and protective, completely different from the witch's cold hunger. "You have done well," she said in accented English. "But the iron will not hold her forever. The children's spirits must be returned to their bodies before dawn, or they will be lost." "How?" "She keeps them in the burial ground. You must go there and call them back. But beware, she will fight hardest at the end." The Cherokee woman began to fade. "Tell my peoples, descendants, that the old protections still matter. Some things should not be forgotten." I ran through the woods toward the burial ground, crashing through underbrush and jumping over fallen logs. Behind me, I could hear the witch screaming with fury as the iron slowly drained her power. At the burial ground, I found what I was looking for. a deep depression in the earth surrounded by ancient stones. The witch had been using this sacred place as a prison for the souls she stole. "Children," I called into the darkness. "Billy, Jenny, Marcus, Amy, all of you, it's time to come home." At first, nothing happened. Then I saw them, faint, ghostly shapes rising from the ground, the spirits of 12 children, looking confused and frightened. "Follow me," I said. "Your parents are waiting." The ghost children began to move toward me, but the witch wasn't finished. She materialized in front of us, no longer bothering to wear a human shape. She was a thing of shadows and hunger, with eyes like black holes and claws like broken branches. "They belong to me," she shrieked. "No," I said firmly. "They belong to themselves." The witch lunged at me, but the iron horseshoes had weakened her. Instead of solid claws, her attack passed through me like cold wind. The children's spirits rushed past her, moving toward their bodies back at camp. But the witch had one last trick. She grabbed the spirit of little Amy Rodriguez, the youngest and weakest of the group. "I'll keep this one," she hissed, "as payment for what you've taken from me." Amy's spirit was fading, becoming transparent. In a few more seconds, she would be lost forever. I did the only thing I could think of. I grabbed one of the iron horseshoes and pressed it against the witch's form. The contact was like touching a live wire. Pain shot through my entire body, and I felt something cold and hungry trying to enter my mind. But I held on. The witch screamed and released Amy's spirit. The little girl's ghost rushed away toward camp, toward life. The witch began to dissolve, her form breaking apart like smoke in the wind. "This isn't over," she whispered as she faded. "Others will come. Others like me. The hollow will never truly be safe." Then she was gone. I ran back to camp as the first light of dawn touched the sky. The parents were gathered around their children, who were starting to stir and wake up. Billy Morrison opened his eyes and looked up at his father with recognition and love. Real love, not the empty mimicry I'd seen for days. "Dad," he said weakly, "what happened? I feel like I've been sleeping for a long time." One by one, the children woke up. They were weak and confused, with no memory of the past 3 days, but they were themselves again. All except one. Amy Rodriguez never woke up. Her body breathed, her heart beat, but her eyes remained closed. The doctors later said it was a rare heart condition that had gone undetected. Nobody questioned it. But I knew the truth. Amy's spirit had been held too long. Part of her never made it back. We got the children to the hospital. Most of them recovered completely, though some parents mentioned small personality changes, a new fear of the dark, difficulty sleeping, strange dreams about old women and deep woods. I wrote my official report as a medical emergency, possibly some kind of gas leak or toxic plant exposure that caused hallucinations and disorientation. The state accepted it without question. Nobody wanted to investigate too closely. I quit youth programs after that. I still work as a forest ranger, but I stick to trail maintenance and fire prevention now. I can't trust myself around children anymore. What if I miss something? What if there are other things in the woods, other hungry spirits waiting for innocent victims? Sometimes, late at night, I get reports of similar incidents from other rangers across Appalachia. Children acting strange after camping trips, families who come back from the mountains, somehow different. The old woman was right. The Witch of Witch Hollow was just one of many. So I'll leave you with this warning. If you take your children camping in the old mountains, watch them carefully. Make sure they stay close to camp at night. And if they start acting different, if they seem to know things they shouldn't know, if animals avoid them, if their photos come out blurred, don't make excuses. Get them away from the woods immediately. Because sometimes the thing that comes home with you isn't your child at all. And sometimes, when I look in mirrors, I catch a glimpse of someone else looking back. Someone with ancient eyes and a cruel smile. The witch was wrong about one thing. She said this wasn't over. She was right. My name is Jeremiah Colburner, but everyone calls me Jerry. I've been a forest ranger for 17 years, and in all that time, I never ran from anything. Not from the big fire that almost took out half of Daniel Boone National Forest. Not from that angry mama bear with cubs who cornered me near Salt Creek. Not even when I had to catch a mountain lion with nothing but my bare hands and a rope. But I ran from the howler. People in the hills around Devil's Backbone Ridge have been telling stories about that thing for as long as anyone can remember. They say it's a beast that makes men go crazy, makes them do things they'd never think of doing, jump off cliffs, walk into fires, worse things. I always figured those were just stories, excuses for men who couldn't handle the mountains. The mountains can break you if you're not strong enough. I've seen it happen plenty of times. City folks come up here thinking they know what they're doing, and the wilderness shows them different. My family knows about being broken by these hills. My wife Sarah died 5 years ago from cancer. My boy Tommy died 3 years back in a mining accident over in Harlan County. He was only 19. After that, I asked for the most remote posting they had. I wanted to be alone with the trees and the rocks and the silence. That's how I ended up at Devil's Backbone Ridge. It's a mean piece of land, that ridge. Like someone took a knife and cut a line across the mountain. The trail runs along the spine with steep drops on both sides that'll kill you if you slip. When the morning mist rolls in, you can't see more than 10 feet in any direction. It's 20 miles from the nearest town, and the only way up is a foot trail that takes most of a day to climb. Perfect for a man who wants to be left alone. I had a little ranger station up there. Just a cabin, really, with a radio and some basic supplies. My job was to watch for fires and keep an eye on the wildlife. Sometimes hunters would come through, but not often. Most people were scared of Devil's Backbone. They said it was haunted. I lived up there for 2 years without any trouble. Sure, the wind sounded strange at night, howling through the rocks, and sometimes the mist would play tricks on your eyes, making shapes that looked almost like people. But that's just mountain life. You get used to it. Then came March of 1975. The weather was warming up, and the last of the winter snow was melting. The mist was thicker than usual that morning, and everything was real quiet. Too quiet, now that I think about it. Usually you'd hear birds singing, squirrels chattering, maybe a deer moving through the brush. But that morning, nothing. I was drinking my coffee on the cabin porch when I heard the radio crackle to life. "Jerry, you there?" It was dispatch down in the valley. "I'm here, Charlie. We got a problem up your way. 3 hunters went up Devil's Backbone 2 days ago. Their families are worried sick. They were supposed to be back yesterday." I sighed and set down my coffee. "I'll take a look around. Probably got lost in the mist." "Maybe. But Jerry, their truck's still at the trailhead. Keys inside. Looks like they just walked away from it." That was strange. Hunters are careful with their vehicles. You don't leave a truck unlocked in the mountains, not if you want to find it the same way you left it. "I'll head down the trail and look for them," I said. "Appreciate it, Jerry. Their names are Bill Morrison, Jake Peters, and Danny Holbrook. All from Corbin. Good men, experienced hunters." I packed my gear and headed out into the mist. The trail was slippery from the melting snow, and I had to be careful not to lose my footing. The drop on either side was maybe 300 feet straight down into jagged rocks. About 2 miles down from my cabin, I found the first sign of the hunters, some candy bar wrappers and cigarette butts beside the trail. They'd stopped here for a break. Nothing unusual about that. But then I noticed something else. Scratches in the rock face beside the trail. Deep scratches, like claw marks, but they were huge, bigger than any bear I'd ever seen. And they were fresh. I knelt down to get a better look. The scratches went deep into the granite, like whatever made them had claws as hard as steel. I'd been tracking wildlife for 17 years, and I'd never seen marks like these. That's when I heard it for the first time. A howl that came from deep in the valley below. But it wasn't like any animal sound I'd ever heard. It was long and low, with something in it that made my skin crawl. Something that made me want to cover my ears and run. But I didn't run. Not yet. The howl died away, leaving the mountains silent again. I stood there listening, waiting for it to come again, but there was nothing. Just the sound of my own breathing and the drip of melting snow. I kept following the trail, looking for more signs of the hunters. About a mile further down, I found their camp. 3 sleeping bags, a cold fire pit, and gear scattered around like they'd left in a hurry. But left for where? I searched around the campsite and found tracks leading away from the trail. Boot prints in the soft earth heading toward the edge of the ridge. I followed them, my heart starting to beat faster. The tracks led right to the cliff edge. And there they stopped. I looked over the side, and that's when I saw them. 3 bodies at the bottom of the ravine, maybe 200 feet down. They looked like tiny dolls from up there, broken and still. I got on my radio right away. "Charlie, I found them. They're at the bottom of Dead Man's Drop. All 3. Jesus, how'd they fall?" I looked at the tracks again. They led straight to the edge, like the men had walked right off the cliff. But that didn't make sense. Experienced hunters don't just walk off cliffs in broad daylight. Heck, I don't know yet. I need to get down there and take a look. "Be careful, Jerry. We'll send a recovery team, but it'll take them most of the day to get up there." I found a way down the side of the ravine using my ropes and climbing gear. It took me an hour to reach the bottom. When I got to the bodies, what I saw made my blood turn cold. The men hadn't just fallen, they'd jumped. I could tell by the way they'd landed, the way their bodies were positioned. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was their faces. I've seen plenty of dead men, car accidents, hunting accidents, heart attacks in the woods. But I'd never seen faces like these. They were twisted up with fear, like they'd seen something so terrible it had driven them out of their minds. Their eyes were wide open, staring at nothing. Their mouths were open too, like they'd been screaming when they jumped. Bill Morrison, the oldest of the 3, was still holding his rifle. But he'd thrown away his pack, his water, everything else, like he'd been running from something and didn't care about anything except getting away. I searched around the bottom of the ravine, looking for clues about what might have scared them so bad. That's when I found the paw prints. They were in the soft mud near a little creek. Huge prints, bigger than my whole hand. They looked almost like wolf prints, but a wolf would have to be the size of a small horse to make tracks that big. And there was something else about them that didn't look right. The claws were too long, too sharp. And there were only 4 toes instead of 5. I took some pictures with my camera and made plaster casts of the best prints. Then I climbed back up to the top of the ridge. The sun was starting to get low, and I didn't want to be down in that ravine after dark. Something about this whole situation had me spooked. Back at my cabin, I tried to make a sense of what I'd seen. 3 experienced hunters scared so bad they jumped off a cliff. Giant claw marks in solid rock. Paw prints from something that shouldn't exist. I made myself some dinner and sat on the porch, watching the sun go down behind the mountains. The mist was starting to roll in again, thicker than before. And as it got dark, I started hearing sounds. First, it was just the usual night sounds, owls hooting, branches creaking in the wind. But then I heard something else. Footsteps. Big, heavy footsteps, like something large was walking around my cabin. I grabbed my flashlight and my rifle and went outside. The beam of my light barely cut through the thick mist. I couldn't see more than a few feet in any direction. "Hello?" I called out. "Anyone there?" The footsteps stopped. I stood there for maybe 5 minutes, listening. Nothing. Just my own heart pounding and the whisper of wind through the trees. Then I heard the howl again. It was closer this time, maybe only a few hundred yards away, and it was different from before. This time, mixed in with that terrible animal sound, I could swear I heard something else. A voice, a human voice calling for help. But that was impossible. The only people on Devil's Backbone Ridge were at the bottom of Dead Man's Drop, and they weren't calling for anything anymore. I went back inside and locked the door. I checked my rifle to make sure it was loaded, then sat by the window, watching and listening. The howling came 3 more times that night, always from a different direction. And each time, that voice was in it. Sometimes it sounded like a woman crying. Sometimes like a child calling for his mother. The last time I heard it, just before dawn, the voice sounded like my boy Tommy. "Dad," it called through the mist. "Dad, help me. I'm scared." I almost opened that door, almost went running out into the mist to find him. But Tommy was dead, had been dead for 3 years. Whatever was out there, it wasn't my son. But God help me, it sounded just like him. The recovery team arrived the next morning, 3 men with ropes and climbing gear and a portable stretcher. The leader was Marcus Redthorn, a ranger I'd known for 10 years. Good man, steady head on his shoulders. If anyone could help me figure out what had happened to those hunters, it was Marcus. "Hell of a thing, Jerry," he said, looking over the edge of the cliff. "What do you think spooked them so bad?" I showed him the claw marks and the plaster casts I'd made of the paw prints. He studied them for a long time, frowning. "Never seen anything like this," he said finally. "Maybe a bear with some kind of growth disorder? Makes them bigger than normal?" "Bears don't have 4 toes," I said. "No, they don't." We spent the morning getting the bodies up from the bottom of the ravine. It was hard work and dangerous. The ropes kept acting strange, fraying in places they shouldn't fray. One of them snapped completely when we were bringing up the second body, and we almost lost Jake Peters all over again. "This rope is brand new," said Tommy Chen, one of the recovery team. He was examining the broken end. "Look at this. It's like something chewed through it." The rope looked like it had been sliced with a razor blade. Clean cuts, too precise for an accident. Marcus was getting nervous. I could tell by the way he kept looking around, like he expected something to come charging out of the mist. "Let's get these bodies packed up and get out of here," he said. But when we tried to leave, we found the trail blocked. There was a tree across the path, a big oak that must have weighed 2 tons. It was lying right where we needed to go, and its trunk was too thick to climb over and too heavy to move. "This tree wasn't here this morning," said Marcus. He was right. We'd come up this same trail just a few hours ago, and there had been no tree. But here it was, blocking our way like a gate. "Must have fallen while we were working," said Tommy Chen. But he didn't sound like he believed it. The tree hadn't fallen. The stump was still standing, and there were tool marks on it. Axe marks, but made with an axe bigger than any man could swing. And the marks were fresh. Wood chips were still scattered around the base. "We'll have to go around," said Marcus. "Take the old mining trail." The mining trail was dangerous, barely more than a goat path along the steepest part of the ridge, but it was the only other way down. We loaded the bodies onto the stretcher and started along the narrow trail. The mist was getting thicker, and the temperature was dropping. I could feel something watching us, following us. Every few minutes I'd stop and look back, but I never saw anything except gray fog. That's when we started hearing the voices. At first it was just Marcus. He stopped walking and turned around, looking confused. "Did someone call my name?" he asked. We all listened, but there was nothing. "Must have been the wind," I said. But 5 minutes later, Tommy Chen heard his name too. Then Bill Garrett, the 3rd member of the recovery team. Each time they'd stop and look around like they were trying to find whoever was calling them. The voices were coming from over the edge of the cliff, down in the deep places where nothing lived. They sounded like people in trouble, people who needed help. But there was nobody down there except rocks and trees and darkness. "Don't listen to them," I told the others. "Whatever you do, don't listen." But it was hard not to listen. The voices were getting clearer, more urgent. I started hearing my name too. "Jerry," the voice called. It was a woman's voice, soft and sad. "Jerry, please help me. I'm lost." It sounded like Sarah, like my dead wife. Marcus was the first one to break. We were maybe halfway down the mining trail when he suddenly dropped his end of the stretcher and walked toward the cliff edge. "Marcus," I shouted, "get back here." But he wasn't listening. His eyes were wide and empty, like he was sleepwalking. He kept walking toward the edge, where the trail dropped away into nothing. Tommy Chen and I grabbed him just as he reached the cliff. He fought us, trying to pull away, trying to get to the edge. "She needs me," he kept saying. "Can't you hear her? She needs me." We held on to him until the spell broke. Then he collapsed, shaking all over. "What the hell is happening up here?" he whispered. That night, we made camp in a little clearing, afraid to try the trail in the dark. We built a big fire and took turns keeping watch, but the fire kept going out no matter how much wood we put on it, and the mist kept getting thicker, pressing in around us like a living thing. The howling started just after midnight. It was louder than before, closer, and now I could hear more than one voice mixed in with that terrible animal sound. Men's voices, women's voices, children crying, all of them calling for help, all of them lost and afraid. "That's my daughter," whispered Bill Garrett. His face was white as paper. "That's Jenny. She's calling for me." "Jenny's safe at home in Lexington," I told him. "That's not her." But he wasn't listening. He was staring out into the mist with that same empty look Marcus had worn. Before any of us could stop him, he stood up and walked away from the fire. We heard his footsteps getting fainter and fainter until there was nothing but silence. We found his body the next morning at the bottom of another cliff, half a mile from our camp. Same expression on his face as the hunters. Same look of absolute terror. Marcus and Tommy Chen wanted to leave right then, forget about procedure, just get off Devil's Backbone Ridge as fast as they could. But I couldn't go, not yet, because I'd figured out what was happening. And I knew it would happen again if I didn't stop it. "You two head down," I told them. "Get word to the Cherokee Nation. Tell them the binding stones on Devil's Backbone are fail. Zinti." "What binding stones?" asked Marcus. "The ones the old people put here 100 years ago to keep the Mad Maker locked up." They thought I'd lost my mind. Maybe I had, but I'd spent my whole life in these mountains, and I'd heard the old stories. Stories about things that lived in the deep places, things that fed on human pain and fear and despair. Things that could drive a man crazy with grief, make him jump off a cliff just to stop the voices in his head. Marcus and Tommy Chen left that afternoon. I watched them disappear into the mist, hoping they'd make it down alive. Then I went looking for the binding stones. I found them just as the sun was setting. A circle of old stones covered with Cherokee markings, hidden in a grove of dead trees about a mile from my cabin. Some of the stones had fallen over, others were cracked. And in the center of the circle, there was a hole in the ground, a cave opening that went down into the mountain. That's where it was living, the thing that had killed the hunters and Bill Garrett, the thing the Cherokee called the Mad Maker. As I stood there looking at that dark hole, I heard the howl again. But this time, it wasn't coming from far away. It was coming from right below my feet. And mixed in with that howl, clear as day, I heard my boy Tommy's voice. "Dad," he called. "Dad, come down here. I've been waiting for you." I should have run. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to get away from that hole, to get off Devil's Backbone Ridge and never come back. But I couldn't leave. Not when Tommy was down there calling for me. Even though I knew Tommy was dead. Even though I knew it wasn't really him. I went back to my cabin and got my gear. Rope, flashlight, my rifle, and a stick of dynamite I kept for clearing fallen trees. If I was going down into that hole, I was going prepared. The sun was almost gone when I came back to the stone circle. The mist was rolling in thick, and shadows were getting long. I could hear movement down in the cave, like something big was stirring around down there. I tied my rope to one of the standing stones and dropped the other end into the hole. It was deep. My 100-foot rope disappeared into the darkness, and I couldn't see the bottom. "Tommy," I called down. "You there, son?" "Dad!" His voice echoed up from way down deep. "Please come down, I'm scared." My heart was breaking. I knew it wasn't really Tommy, but it sounded so much like him. Like he was 6 years old again, calling for me after a nightmare. I started down the rope. The cave was bigger than I'd expected. My flashlight beam couldn't reach the walls in most places. The air was warm and humid, and it smelled wrong, like something that had been dead for a long time. About 50 feet down, I found the first bones. They were human bones, scattered across a wide ledge. Skulls, ribs, leg bones, all mixed together like someone had been collecting them for years. Some of them were old, cracked and yellow. Others looked fresh. "Dad, I'm further down," Tommy's voice called. "Keep coming." Against every bit of sense I had, I kept going. The cave got bigger as I went deeper. My flashlight showed me passages leading off in different directions, all of them carved smooth like something had been living down here for a very long time. The walls were covered with scratch marks, the same kind I'd seen up on the ridge. At the bottom of the rope, maybe 150 feet down, I found myself in a huge chamber. It was as big as a church inside, with a ceiling that disappeared into darkness above my head. And that's when I saw it. The thing was curled up in the center of the chamber like a sleeping dog. But it wasn't any kind of dog I'd ever seen. It was huge, maybe 12 feet long, covered in dark fur that seemed to move on its own. Its legs were too long, its head too big. And when it opened its eyes and looked at me, I saw intelligence there, not animal intelligence. Something much worse. "Hello, Jerry," it said. And it was using Tommy's voice. I raised my rifle, but my hands were shaking so bad I could barely hold it. "You're not Tommy," I said. "No," it agreed. "But I know all about Tommy. I know how he died in that mine. I know how you blame yourself for not being there. I know how much you miss him." The creature stood up, and I saw how wrong it really was. It walked on 4 legs like a wolf, but its front paws had fingers. Long black fingers with claws like knives. Its face was almost human, but stretched out like a dog's snout. And its teeth, God, its teeth were like broken glass. "I can bring him back," it said in Tommy's voice. "I can make the pain stop. All you have to do is jump, just like the others did. Jump, and you'll see Tommy again." For a moment, I almost believed it. The grief hit me like a hammer. All the pain I'd been carrying for 3 years. The guilt, the loneliness, the empty hole in my chest where my boy used to be. I could see Tommy in my mind, clear as day. See him running toward me with his arms open, smiling that big smile of his. All I had to do was jump off Devil's Backbone Ridge, and the pain would stop forever. But then I remembered something the creature had said, just like the others did. This thing had killed those hunters. It had killed Bill Garrett. It was feeding on people's grief, their pain, their despair, growing stronger every time someone jumped. "You son of a bitch," I whispered. The creature's face changed, becoming more animal, more wolf-like. It snarled, showing me those glass teeth. "You will jump," it said. But now its voice was different, older, deeper. Not Tommy's voice anymore. "Everyone jumps eventually. I will make you hear things that will drive you mad. I will show you things that will break your mind." It started howling, and the sound filled the chamber like thunder. But there was more than just sound in that howl. There were images, feelings, memories that weren't mine. I saw Tommy dying in the mine cave-in. But this time, I was there. I was the one who caused it. I was the one who didn't listen when he said the support beams looked weak. I saw Sarah on her deathbed, but now she was angry with me. Angry that I hadn't saved her, that I hadn't done enough, that I'd let her die alone while I was off playing ranger in the mountains. I saw every mistake I'd ever made, every person I'd ever failed, every moment of weakness and cowardice and selfishness. The creature was digging through my memories like a buzzard picking through roadkill, finding every painful thing and making it worse. The howl went on, and I felt my grip on reality starting to slip. Maybe it would be easier to jump. Maybe I deserved to die for all the things I'd done wrong. But then I remembered something else. The old Cherokee stories my grandmother used to tell me when I was little. Stories about creatures like this one, creatures that fed on human sadness. And I remembered what she'd said about fighting them. "You can't kill sadness with a gun, Jerry, but you can kill the thing that's eating it." I pulled the stick of dynamite out of my pack and lit the fuse. The creature stopped howling and stared at me. "What are you doing?" it asked. "Finishing what the Cherokee started," I said. I threw the dynamite as hard as I could toward the back of the chamber, where the creature's nest was built among more piles of human bones. Then I ran for my rope. The explosion came just as I started climbing. The whole mountain shook and rocks started falling from the ceiling. I could hear the creature screaming behind me, but it wasn't using Tommy's voice anymore. It was making sounds no living thing should make. I climbed that rope, faster than I'd ever climbed anything in my life. Rock fragments were raining down, and I could feel the cave collapsing below me. My lungs were burning, and my arms felt like they were going to tear off, but I kept climbing. I made it to the surface just as the ground started caving in. The whole stone circle was collapsing, falling into the chamber below. I rolled away from the edge as the earth swallowed up the hole where the creature had lived. When the rumbling stopped, there was nothing left but a depression in the ground filled with broken stones. The cave was gone, sealed up forever. And for the first time in 3 years, Devil's Backbone Ridge was quiet. They found me 3 days later, wandering down the mountain trail. I was dehydrated and half crazy from lack of sleep, but I was alive. Marcus and Tommy Chen had made it down safely and sent a search party back up after me. The official report said the deaths were caused by altitude sickness and disorientation. 7 men had died on Devil's Backbone Ridge in 4 days, but as far as the government was concerned, it was just a series of tragic accidents. They closed the ridge to hikers and hunters, put up warning signs about unstable geological conditions. I spent 3 weeks in the hospital. The doctor said I had a severe nervous breakdown brought on by stress and isolation. They gave me pills for depression and anxiety, told me I needed to take time off, maybe find a new line of work. I didn't try to tell them about the creature. Who would have believed me? I retired from the Forest Service and moved down to the coast of North Carolina. Got a little house near the beach where I can see the ocean from my front porch. The sound of waves is different from the sound of wind in the mountains. Gentler. It doesn't make you think about voices calling from dark places. But I still have the nightmares. And on windy nights, when the waves are loud and the house creaks in the salt air, I sometimes think I hear it. That howl, carried on the wind from 1,000 miles away, mixed in with Tommy's voice, calling my name. Marcus Redthorn came to visit me last month. He's working with the Cherokee Nation now, helping them identify other places where the old binding stones might be failing. Places where things like the Mad Maker might be getting loose. It's not just Devil's Backbone, he told me. We've had reports from all over the Appalachians. Hikers going missing, people jumping off cliffs for no reason, whole families found dead in their cars, with expressions of absolute terror on their faces. He showed me a map with red pins stuck in it. Dozens of them, scattered across Kentucky, Tennessee, West Virginia, North Carolina. Each pin marked a place where people had died in ways that didn't make sense. The Cherokee elders say their ancestors bound hundreds of these things, Marcus said, locked them away in deep places where they couldn't hurt anyone. But the bindings are old, and they're breaking down. He leaned forward, and I could see the fear in his eyes. Jerry, we need your help. You're the only person who's ever faced one of these things and lived to tell about it. We need to know how to fight them. I thought about it for a long time. Thought about going back to the mountains, back to the dark places where things like the Mad Maker wait for grieving men to come close enough to hear their lies. I can't, I told him finally. I'm sorry, Marcus, but I can't go back up there. If I hear that howl again, if I hear Tommy's voice, I don't think I'll be strong enough to resist it a second time. Marcus nodded like he understood, but I could see the disappointment in his face. After he left, I sat on my porch and watched the sunset over the ocean. The waves rolled in steady and peaceful, washing the beach clean with every tide. Down here, the dead stay dead. Down here, grief is just grief, not something that feeds monsters in the deep places. But I know the mountains are still up there, full of shadows and mist and things that shouldn't exist. And I know that somewhere, other rangers and hikers and hunters are hearing voices in the wind. Voices of people they've lost. Voices that sound real enough to follow, off the edge of a cliff. I keep Marcus's phone number by my telephone, just in case I ever get brave enough or crazy enough to go back. But so far, the ocean is louder than the mountains. So far, the voices can't reach me here. So far, my name is Augustus Stillwater, but everyone calls me Gus. I've been a park ranger for 14 years now, working the Cherokee National Forest in Tennessee. Most folks think being a ranger is all about helping lost hikers and putting out campfires. They don't know about the other side of the job, busting up illegal stills and chasing moonshiners through thick woods. I'm good at what I do. Real good. In my time, I've destroyed 67 illegal stills and arrested over 100 moonshiners. Used to be a sheriff's deputy before this, so I know how criminals think. My ex-wife Sarah used to say I was too good at catching people doing wrong things. Maybe that's why she left. That and the drinking problem I had back then. Been sober 3 years now. The job keeps me busy enough that I don't think about whiskey much anymore. Well, except when I'm pouring it out of some moonshiner's jug onto the ground. September of 1987 was turning into a busy month. We'd gotten reports of a new operation somewhere in the mountains, but nobody could say exactly where. The tips all pointed to the same general area, a place the old-timers called Moonshine Valley. I knew the stories about that valley. Every ranger did. Back in 1923, federal agents raided a big moonshine operation there. Things went bad fast, real bad. By the time the smoke cleared, 3 federal agents and 4 moonshiners were dead. The valley got a reputation after that. Folks said it was cursed, haunted by angry spirits. I didn't believe in ghosts, never had. Ghosts were just guilty minds and too much white lightning making people see things that weren't there. The valley sat about 10 miles northeast of my station, tucked away in a hollow that most people never found. Only one way in, a narrow gap between 2 ridges that you'd miss if you didn't know exactly where to look. I'd been there a few times over the years, always hoping to catch someone cooking shine. Never found anything but old foundations and rusted equipment from decades past. But this time felt different. The reports were too specific, too recent. Someone was making moonshine in Moonshine Valley again, and it was my job to stop them. I loaded my truck with everything I'd need: camera for evidence, sledgehammer for destroying equipment, first aid kit, and my .38 service revolver. The forecast called for cool weather, typical for early September in the mountains. Perfect weather for making illegal whiskey, actually. Cool nights meant better temperature control for the distilling process. The drive up to the valley took about an hour on winding mountain roads. I parked at the bottom of the ridge and hiked up the old trail. The woods were quiet, too quiet. Usually you'd hear birds, squirrels, something. But as I got closer to the valley, everything went silent. The gap between the ridges was just wide enough for one person to walk through. I'd been through it maybe a dozen times before, but today something felt wrong. The air was colder than it should be, and there was a smell I couldn't place. Not the usual forest smells of leaves and dirt. Something else. Something that made my nose wrinkle. I squeezed through the gap and down into the valley. It was just like I remembered. A hidden hollow, maybe half a mile long and a quarter-mile wide. A small stream ran through the middle, and there were the old foundations where stills used to operate back in the day. A few abandoned cabins dotted the far end, their roofs long since caved in. But something was different this time. As I walked toward the stream, I could smell it stronger now. That sharp, sweet smell of fermenting corn mash. Someone had been making moonshine here recently. I pulled out my camera and started looking around. That's when I found it, a complete moonshine still, set up right on one of the old stone foundations. The copper coils were bright and new, the firebox clean, and there were fresh tire tracks in the mud nearby. But here's what. It didn't make sense. The still was cold, stone cold. No sign it had been fired up in weeks. The mash barrels were empty and dry. Yet sitting right next to the still were 3 full mason jars of clear liquid that smelled like the finest moonshine I'd ever encountered. I picked up one of the jars and held it up to the light. It was perfect, crystal clear, no impurities. Professional work. But if nobody had been operating this still, where did this whiskey come from? That's when I noticed my radio crackling. I pulled it from my belt and tried to call the station. Instead of hearing dispatch, I heard music. Old-timey music, the kind they played in the 1920s. Fiddles and banjos and some singer crooning about Prohibition blues. I changed frequencies. Same music. Changed again. Still the same. I looked around the valley again, and that's when I felt it. Like someone was watching me. The temperature seemed to drop another 10 degrees. and the hair on the back of my neck stood up. 14 years of busting stills, and I'd never felt spooked like this. But there was something wrong with Moonshine Valley. Something that made my hands shake as I photographed the evidence and made my notes. I decided to come back the next morning with backup. Whatever was going on here, I didn't want to face it alone. I called Ranger Patricia Millwood that night. Pat had been with the Forest Service for 8 years and knew these mountains better than anyone. If strange things were happening in Moonshine Valley, she'd want to know about it. "You found what?" she asked when I described the still and the fresh moonshine. "I know how it sounds," I said, "but the evidence is right there. Someone's making high-quality shine, but there's no sign anyone's actually been operating the equipment." Pat was quiet for a moment. "Gus, I've got some old files here about that valley. Federal records from the 1923 raid. You might want to see them." The next morning, Pat met me at my station with a cardboard box full of yellowed papers and old photographs. The files made for grim reading. The raid had been planned for months. Federal agents had gotten word that the valley was home to one of the biggest moonshine operations in Tennessee. What they didn't know was that the moonshiners had been tipped off. "Look at this," Pat said, showing me a photograph. It was the same valley I'd been in yesterday, but from 1923. I could see the stills operating, smoke rising from the fires, men working around the equipment. In the background, barely visible, were the federal agents moving in for the raid. The next photo showed the aftermath. Bodies scattered around the stills. Blood on the ground. Equipment destroyed by gunfire. 3 agents died, Pat said. James Morrison, William Hayes, and Thomas Wilson. All of them were young men, early 30s. They left behind wives and children. I studied the photos more carefully. That's when I noticed something that made my blood run cold. One of the agents in the photo looked exactly like me. Not similar, exactly like me. Same height, same build, same face. Even his name was similar. Agent Augustus Morrison. "Pat," I said, pointing to the photo, "look at this agent." She leaned in and her face went pale. "Jesus, Gus, that could be your twin brother." We decided to go back to the valley together. This time I brought extra equipment, a better camera, more film, and a digital thermometer. I wanted to document everything properly. The hike up to the valley seemed longer this time. Pat was unusually quiet, and I could tell the files had spooked her too. When we reached the gap between the ridges, she stopped. "You feel that?" she asked. I did. The temperature had dropped at least 20 degrees. My thermometer read 45 degrees, but it was supposed to be in the mid-60s today. We squeezed through the gap and into the valley. Everything was exactly as I'd left it, except for one thing. The 3 mason jars of moonshine were gone. "Maybe an animal knocked them over," Pat suggested. But there were no broken jars, no spilled liquid, no smell of moonshine. The jars had simply vanished. I started photographing the still again while Pat explored the old cabins. That's when my camera started acting up. Every time I pointed it toward the still, the image in the viewfinder went fuzzy. But when I pointed it anywhere else, it worked fine. "Gus," Pat called from one of the cabins, "you need to see this." I walked over to where she was standing. She was holding 3 metal badges, tarnished but still readable. Federal agent badges. The names on them were Morrison, Hayes, and Wilson, the 3 agents who died in the 1923 raid. "Where did you find these?" I asked. "Just lying on the ground inside the cabin," she said. "But look at them, Gus. They're not 64 years old. They look like they were dropped yesterday." She was right. The badges were too clean, too shiny. They should have been completely rusted through after all these years in the mountains. That's when we heard it. The sound of gunfire echoing through the valley. But not modern gunfire. These were the sharp cracks of old rifles and the deeper booms of shotguns. We both hit the ground, reaching for our weapons. But the shooting stopped as suddenly as it had started. When we looked up, there was nobody else in the valley. Nobody at all. "What the hell was that?" Pat whispered. I didn't answer because I was staring at the trees near the still. Fresh bullet holes had appeared in the bark, still smoking. I walked over to examine them. The holes were at different heights, as if there had been a running gun battle between men taking cover. I touched one of the bullet holes. It was warm. "Pat," I said, "we need to get out of here. Now." But as we started toward the gap, Pat grabbed my arm. "Listen," she said. I could hear voices, faint at first, too, hen getting louder, men shouting to each other, calling out warnings and commands. The voices had an old-fashioned sound to them, the kind of accent you heard in movies about the 1920s. "Federal agents, you're surrounded. Like hell we are. This here's our valley. Put down your weapons. Come and take them, you government bastards." The voices seemed to be coming from all around us, but we couldn't see anyone. Then the gunfire started again, loud and close. We could hear bullets whining past us, could see muzzle flashes from behind trees and rocks. Pat and I ran for the gap, stumbling and falling in our panic to get out. Behind us, the battle raged on, shouts and screams and the terrible sounds of men dying. We didn't stop running until we reached our trucks. Even then, we could still hear the faint sounds of gunfire coming from the valley. "What did we just see?" Pat asked, her hands shaking as she tried to light a cigarette. I didn't have an answer. I'd been a lawman for over 20 years, and I'd never experienced anything like this. But one thing was clear. Whatever was happening in Moonshine Valley wasn't natural. And somehow, I was connected to it. That agent in the photograph, Augustus Morrison, looked exactly like me. That couldn't be coincidence. As we drove away, I made a decision. I was going back to that valley. Whatever was happening there, I needed to understand it. Because I had a feeling that Agent Morrison and I shared more than just a name and a face. I couldn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that photograph of Agent Morrison. The resemblance was impossible, like looking at myself in period clothing. Pat had taken copies of all the files, and we spent hours going through them, looking for any explanation. What we found made things worse. Agent Augustus Morrison had been 41 years old when he died, same age as me. He'd been a sheriff's deputy before joining the federal agents, just like me. He'd been divorced and had a drinking problem. The similarities were too many to be coincidence. "There's something else," Pat said, pointing to a witness statement from 1923. "Look at this." An old mountain woman named Granny Hutchins had lived near the valley. After the raid, she told investigators that the valley was cursed. She said the spirits of the dead would never rest until the truth came out about what really happened that day. According to Granny Hutchins, the federal agents had been betrayed. Someone in the Moonshiner operation had been working with the government, feeding them information. But at the last minute, the informant had gotten cold feet and warned the Moonshiners. That's why the raid went bad so quickly. She says here that the betrayer was never caught, Pat said, and that all the spirits, agents and Moonshiners both, are trapped in the valley, doomed to fight the same battle over and over again. "You don't believe that?" I said. Pat looked at me seriously. "After what we saw yesterday, I'm starting to." The next morning, I went back to the valley alone. I had to know what was happening, and I couldn't risk putting Pat in more danger. This time, I brought different equipment. Along with my camera, I packed a tape recorder, more thermometers, and a compass. If something supernatural was happening in that valley, I wanted to document it properly. The hike up felt different this time. The woods were completely silent. No birds, no insects, no wind. It was like the whole mountain was holding its breath. When I reached the gap, my compass started spinning wildly. The needle couldn't find magnetic north. It just spun around and around like it was confused. I squeezed through into the valley and immediately knew something had changed. The still was operating. Smoke rose from the firebox underneath the copper coils. I could hear the bubbling of boiling mash and see steam coming from the condenser. Someone was making moonshine right now in broad daylight, but there was nobody there. I approached the still carefully, my hand on my service weapon. The fire was burning hot, the mash was bubbling, and fresh moonshine was dripping from the coil into a collection jug, but there was no one operating the equipment. As I watched, an invisible hand seemed to adjust the fire, adding wood to keep the temperature steady. Another invisible presence checked the mash barrels, stirring them with a long wooden paddle that moved by itself. I started taking pictures, but my camera was acting up again. Some photos came out normal. Others showed figures that weren't visible to my naked eye. Shadowy men in 1920s clothing working around the still. That's when I heard footsteps behind me. I spun around and saw him, Agent Augustus Morrison, walking toward me through the valley. He looked exactly like me, but dressed in a federal agent's uniform from 1923. His face was pale and his eyes were hollow, but he was definitely there. "You shouldn't have come back," he said, his voice echoing strangely in the valley. I drew my weapon, but Morrison just shook his head. "That won't help you," he said. "Nothing can help you now. You're part of this, just like I am." "Part of what?" I demanded. "The curse, the endless battle. Every day we fight the same fight. Every day we die the same death. And every day we wake up to do it all over again." Morrison started walking toward the still, and I followed him. As we got closer, I could see other figures becoming visible. Men in overalls and work shirts, the moonshiners. They were loading weapons, preparing for a fight they knew was coming. "Why?" I asked. "Why is this happening?" "Because someone betrayed us," Morrison said. "Someone who was supposed to be on our side warned the moonshiners. We walked into a trap and now we can never leave." One of the moonshiners looked up at me. He was a big man with a thick black beard and angry eyes. "You're early this time, Fed," he said. "But it don't matter. Y'all are gonna die just the same." That's when I understood. The valley wasn't just haunted. It was stuck in time, repeating the same deadly events over and over. And somehow, I was being pulled into the cycle. "How do I get out?" I asked Morrison. But he was already fading away, becoming transparent. "You don't," he said. "None of us do. Welcome to Moonshine Valley, Agent Stillwater. Hope you're ready to die." The gunfire started again, but this time I was in the middle of it. Bullets whistled past my head as I dove behind an old log. Around me, the Battle of 1923 was playing out in full, deadly detail. I could see federal agents moving through the trees, their weapons drawn. I could see moonshiners taking positions behind the stills and cabins. And somewhere in the middle of it all, I could hear someone laughing, a cold, bitter laugh that seemed to come from the valley itself. The shooting went on for what felt like hours. Men fell on both sides, crying out as they died. Blood soaked into the ground around the stills, the air filled with gun smoke and the smell of death. And then, suddenly, everything stopped. The bodies vanished. The blood disappeared. The stills went cold and silent again. I was alone in the valley, but I could feel them watching me. All the dead men, trapped in their eternal battle, waiting for tomorrow, when they would fight and die again. I ran for the gap as fast as I could, but as I reached it, I heard Morrison's voice one more time. "See you tomorrow, Agent Stillwater. Same time, same place. And this time, try to die with honor." I didn't go home that night. Instead, I drove straight to the Cherokee Nation Cultural Center and spent hours talking to tribal elders about the history of Moonshine Valley. What I learned changed everything. The valley had been sacred to the Cherokee for generations before white settlers arrived. It was a place where the spirits of the dead were said to cross over to the next world. But when the moonshiners started operating there in the early 1900s, they disturbed something ancient and powerful. The spirits became confused, explained Elder Mary Ridgecrest, an elderly Cherokee woman who remembered the old stories. They could not find their way to the spirit world, so they remained trapped between worlds, neither alive nor dead. "But why am I being pulled into it?" I asked. Elder Ridgecrest studied my face carefully. "You carry the face and spirit of the federal agent who died there. In Cherokee belief, sometimes spirits are reborn in new bodies, especially when they have unfinished business." She told me that the only way to break the curse was to resolve the unfinished business, to discover the truth about what really happened during the 1923 raid and somehow set the record straight. "But be warned," she said. "If you fail, your spirit will join theirs, trapped forever in that valley of death." The next morning I went back one more time. But this time, Pat insisted on coming with me, despite my protests. "If you're going to get yourself killed by ghosts," she said, "someone needs to be there to write the report." We reached the valley just as the sun was coming up. Everything was quiet at first, but I could feel the spirits gathering, preparing for another day of endless battle. "Pat," I said, "I need you to stay here by the gap. No matter what happens, don't come into the valley. And if things go bad, run." She nodded, but I could see she was scared. I walked toward the still, and as I did, the spirits began to materialize. First Morrison, then the other federal agents, then the moonshiners. They took their positions just like they had every day for 64 years, but this time, I was ready for them. "Wait!" I called out before the shooting could start. "I know what really happened here." Morrison turned to look at me. "What are you talking about?" "The betrayal," I said. "I know who warned the moonshiners." The valley went completely silent. Even the spirits seemed to be holding their breath. "It was one of you," I said, looking at the federal agents. "One of you got cold feet and warned them. That's why the raid went bad so fast." Morrison's face went white. "That's impossible. We were all loyal agents." "Were you?" I asked. I pulled out one of the files Pat had found. "Agent William Hayes, you had family in these mountains. Your cousin married into the Hutchins family, the same family that ran the biggest still in this valley." Agent Hayes stepped forward, his ghostly face twisted with guilt. "You don't understand," he said. "They were going to kill everyone, all of them, men, women, children. I couldn't let that happen." "So you warned them," Morrison said, his voice full of rage. "You betrayed your badge, your oath, your partners." "I saved lives," Hayes shot back. "Or I tried to. I didn't know it would turn into a massacre." The truth was finally out, but the spirits weren't at peace. If anything, they seemed more agitated than before. The valley began to shake and the temperature plummeted. "It's not enough," Morrison said. "The truth doesn't change what happened. We still died. They still died. The curse remains." That's when I understood what had to happen. The spirits weren't just trapped by the curse. They were trapped by their own anger and guilt. Hayes felt guilty for the betrayal. Morrison and the other agents felt betrayed and angry. The moonshiners felt justified in their violence. "You have to forgive each other," I said. "All of you. That's the only way to break free." "Forgive?" Morrison laughed bitterly. "He got us killed." "And you were going to destroy their families," Hayes replied. "Their whole way of life." "Stop!" I shouted. "Don't you see? You're all victims here. The real enemy was never each other. It was the system that put you in this position. Hayes, you were trying to prevent innocent deaths. Morrison, you were doing your job as you understood it. And you moonshiners were just trying to make a living in hard times." The spirits looked at me, then at each other. Slowly, the anger began to drain from their faces. Morrison was the first to speak. "Agent Hayes," he said quietly, I understand why you did what you did. I forgive you." Hayes's eyes filled with ghostly tears. "I'm sorry, Gus. I'm so damn sorry. I never meant for you to die." One by one, the other spirits began to speak. Agents forgiving moonshiners. Moonshiners forgiving agents. Forgiveness flowing through the valley like a healing rain. As they spoke, something began to happen. The spirits started to glow with a soft, warm light. The oppressive cold lifted from the valley. The stills crumbled to dust. The bullet holes in the trees disappeared. "Thank you," Morrison said to me as his spirit began to fade. "Thank you for setting us free." But as the spirits departed for whatever lay beyond, Morrison looked back one more time. "Be careful, Agent Stillwater," he said. "There are other places like this in these mountains. Other spirits who need someone to help them find peace." And then they were gone. Pat and I stayed in the valley for another hour after the spirits departed. The change was dramatic. The oppressive atmosphere was gone, replaced by the normal sounds of mountain wildlife. Birds sang in the trees. A gentle breeze rustled the leaves. The temperature returned to normal. Where the still had stood, we found only old stone foundations covered in decades of moss and decay. The bullet holes were gone from the trees. Even the stream seemed to flow more peacefully. "Is it over?" Pat asked. "For them? Yes," I said. "They've found peace." We filed our report, but we didn't mention the supernatural elements. Who would believe us? Instead, we recommended that Moonshine Valley be declared a historical site and access be restricted indefinitely. The state agreed, and within a month, new signs were posted warning hikers to stay out. I kept working as a ranger for another 5 years, but the job had changed for me. I found myself drawn to the historical aspects of the Forest Service, researching old stories and documenting forgotten events. Eventually, I left law enforcement entirely and became a park historian. Pat stayed with the Forest Service and became one of the most respected rangers in the region. But she never went back to Moonshine Valley, and neither did I. Some places are better left undisturbed, even after the spirits have found peace. The Cherokee Nation officially recognized the valley as a sacred site, which gave us legal grounds to keep people out permanently. Elder Ridgecrest told me that she could feel the difference. The spiritual confusion was gone, and the valley had returned to its natural state as a crossing place for spirits moving on to the next world. But Morrison's warning stayed with me. There were other places in these mountains where violent events had occurred, where spirits might still be trapped by anger and unfinished business. Over the years, I heard stories about other locations, Civil War battlefields, sites of old mining accidents, places where Native Americans had been driven from their homes. Sometimes, late at night, I would dream in voices that weren't my own. I would taste moonshine on my lips despite being sober for years. And sometimes I would feel Morrison's presence, as if he were checking in on me from whatever realm he now inhabited. The valley itself healed over time. When I finally returned 10 years later as part of a historical survey, I found it had become a beautiful, peaceful place. Wildflowers grew where the stills had stood. Clear water flowed in the stream where blood had once soaked the ground. But on certain nights, especially in early September when the air turns cool and the mist rises from the stream, you can still catch the faint smell of fermenting corn mash drifting through the valley. The locals say it's just the natural decay of fallen leaves. But I know, who better? Some memories run too deep for time to erase completely, and some feuds, once resolved, leave behind only the sweet smell of peace and the gentle whisper of spirits finally free to move on to whatever waits beyond the mountains. If you ever find yourself in the Cherokee National Forest and hear tell of places where the past won't stay buried, remember this. Sometimes the dead just need someone to listen to their story, understand their pain, and help them find forgiveness. But be careful. Not all spirits are ready to be saved, and not all of them want to leave. My name is Augustus Stillwater, and this is my story. Make of it what you will. My name is Bartholomew Elkhorn, but everyone calls me Bart. I've been a park ranger for 12 years now, working the George Washington National Forest in Virginia. Most people think my job is about campfires and bear warnings, but my real work happens on the cliffs. I'm what they call a technical rescue specialist. When rock climbers get stuck or hurt on the big walls, they call me. I've pulled 89 people off cliff faces over the years. Broken bones, heat stroke, panic attacks, you name it. I learned my rope work in the Army, teaching mountain warfare before I came home to take care of my mother. Raven's Rock is my domain. It's a 200-foot granite wall that draws the serious climbers, the ones with fancy gear and big egos. The rock sits 6 miles back in the forest, no road access. You hike in with everything on your back, or you don't go at all. April is always tricky in the mountains. One day it's warm enough for shorts, the next you're in a snow squall. The weather can turn mean without warning, and climbers get caught off guard. That's usually when I get the call. But this April was different. The calls weren't about weather or broken gear. They were about people disappearing. The local Cherokee have stories about Raven's Rock. They call it the stone that watches, and say it's been hungry for a very long time. Old Joe Stormcloud, who works with me sometimes, grew up hearing those stories. His grandmother told him the rock was alive, that it hunted people who disturbed its sleep. I never put much stock in ghost stories. In 12 years of rescue work, I've learned that mountains don't kill people. People kill themselves by being careless or cocky. Loose rocks fall because of gravity, not anger. Handholds break because the stone is weak, not because it's mean. But 3 climbers had gone missing in the past month, all experienced, all found with their ropes cut clean like someone had taken a razor to them. The bodies were never recovered. The first was Sarah Chen, a climbing guide from Colorado. Her partner found her gear scattered at the base of the wall, but no sign of her. The second was Michael Torres, a local guy I'd rescued twice before. His climbing partner swore they were tied in together when Michael just vanished mid-route. The third was Jennifer Walsh, who climbed alone despite knowing better. Her car was still in the parking area, but she never came out of the woods. The state police investigated, of course. They figured the missing climbers had fallen and been carried off by animals, or maybe tumbled into one of the deep cracks in the rock. It happens sometimes. Mountains swallow people whole and never give them back. But I knew those climbers. They weren't beginners who might make stupid mistakes. They were careful, experienced people who understood the risks. And their gear, when rope gets cut by a fall, it frays and shows damage. These ropes looked like they'd been sliced with a surgical blade. I started spending more time at Raven's Rock, checking the climbing routes and looking for signs of rockfall or loose stones. The wall looked solid enough. Good granite, no obvious cracks or unstable sections. But something felt wrong about the place. The first thing I noticed was the quiet. Usually you hear birds and insects around the cliffs, especially in spring. But Raven's Rock was silent, like the forest was holding its breath. Even the wind seemed to die when it hit the rock face. The second thing was the warmth. Granite usually stays cool, even on hot days. But when I put my hand against Raven's Rock, the stone felt warm. Not sun-heated warm, but body warm, like something alive underneath. I told myself it was imagination, stress from the missing persons cases. Rocks don't have body heat. Hey, don't watch you climb or choose who lives and who dies. But deep down, I was starting to wonder if maybe old Joe's grandmother knew something I didn't. The call came in on a Tuesday. Morning, another missing climber. This time it was David Kumar, a software engineer from D.C. who climbed every weekend. His girlfriend had dropped him off Monday evening for a solo climb, planning to pick him up Tuesday afternoon. When he didn't show up at the parking area, she called the police. They called me. I hiked in with Jake Stormcloud, old Joe's nephew and my usual climbing partner. Jake carried the technical gear while I brought the medical supplies. Standard missing person search, except we both knew it probably wouldn't be standard at all. We found David's pack at the base of the wall, his approach shoes neatly placed beside it like he'd just stepped out of them to start climbing. His rope was still in the pack, unused, but his climbing shoes and harness were gone. He went up, Jake said, studying the rock face through binoculars, but I don't see him anywhere. The morning route up Raven's Rock follows a crack system called Devil's Backbone. It's a classic 5.8 climb, challenging but well within David's ability. The holds are solid, the protection placement's obvious, not the kind of route where experienced climbers disappear. I started up first, checking each handhold and foothold. The rock felt normal under my fingers, rough granite with good friction. But 20 feet up, I found something that made my blood turn cold. There was a perfect handprint pressed into the stone, not carved or painted, pressed like someone had pushed their palm into wet cement. Except granite doesn't work that way. You can't press shapes into solid rock. Jake, you need to see this. He climbed up to my position and stared at the handprint. It was David's size, about the right shape for his hand, but it was sunk 3 inches deep into stone that should have been harder than steel. Maybe it's natural, Jake said, but his voice was shaky. Some kind of mineral formation. I, too, used the edges of the print. The stone was warm, and for just a second I swore I felt it move under my finger, like a pulse. We kept climbing, following the route David should have taken. 30 feet up, we found another handprint. Then a footprint pressed into a small ledge. Each mark was deeper than the last, like the rock was getting softer as David climbed higher. At 60 feet, we found his chalk bag. It was hanging from a piece of stone that looked like a finger. A perfect stone finger growing right out of the cliff face. Neither Jake nor I had ever seen that particular hold before, and we'd climbed this route dozens of times. "Bart," Jake whispered, "look at the root above us." I followed his gaze upward and felt my stomach drop. The crack system we'd been following was gone, not blocked by rockfall or filled with debris, simply gone, like it had never existed. In its place was smooth, unbroken granite stretching to the top of the cliff. That was impossible. Rock doesn't heal itself. Cracks don't just disappear overnight. But as we hung there on our ropes, staring at the impossible wall above us, I watched something that made me question everything I knew about mountains and stone and the laws of nature. The smooth granite began to ripple. It started as a small wave, like dropping a pebble in still water. The ripple spread outward from a point about 10 feet above us, and as it moved, the stone began to change. Handholds appeared where none had been before. The missing crack system slowly reformed, opening like a sleepy eye. "We need to get down," Jake said. "Right now." I couldn't argue. We rappelled as fast as safety allowed, leaving David's chalk bag hanging from its impossible stone finger. When we reached the ground, I looked back up at the cliff face. It looked completely normal. The Devil's Backbone crack system was exactly where it should be, exactly as it had always been. If I hadn't seen it change with my own eyes, I would have sworn nothing had happened. Jake was already packing up the gear, his movements quick and nervous. "What do you think happened to David?" I asked. Jake stopped packing and looked at me with eyes that held too much knowledge. "My grandmother used to say the rock gets hungry sometimes. She said it would call to people, make them think they were climbing one thing when they were really climbing into its mouth." "That's just a story, Jake." "Is it?" He pointed to the base of the cliff. "Look at David's shoes." I followed his pointing finger and felt ice water flood my veins. David's approach shoes weren't sitting beside his pack anymore. They were pressed into the stone at the base of the wall, like footprints in concrete. The rubber soles were perfectly preserved, every tread mark visible. But there was no concrete, just solid granite, with shoe prints pressed 3 inches deep. As we watched, the stone around the shoe prints began to ripple again. This time the wave moved downward, and the footprints slowly disappeared, swallowed by living rock. Jake grabbed my arm. "We leave now, or we don't leave at all." We hiked out fast, not talking until we reached the parking area. When I finally spoke, my voice sounded strange even to me. 4 missing climbers in 6 weeks. "Yeah," Jake said, "and the rock's getting hungry more often." That night, I called the state police and recommended they close Ravens Rock indefinitely. I told them the cliff face was showing signs of geological instability, that it wasn't safe for climbing. I didn't tell them the cliff face was alive. They didn't close Ravens Rock. The state police said my report was interesting, but needed more evidence before they could restrict access to public lands. The missing climbers were officially listed as presumed dead due to climbing accidents. Case closed. Move along. But climbers kept coming. Word was spreading in the climbing community about Ravens Rock. Not warnings, but challenges. The missing climber, as had become a mystery, and mysteries draw people like moths to flame. I started patrolling the area every day, trying to warn people away. Most listened when a park ranger with 12 years of rescue experience told them a cliff was dangerous, but some didn't. 2 weeks after David Kumar disappeared, I met Elena Vasquez and Tom Chen at the trailhead. They were gearing up for a multi-pitch climb, planning to spend 2 days on the wall. Elena was Sarah Chen's sister, the first climber who'd gone missing, and she'd come looking for answers. Sarah was too good a climber to just fall, Elena told me. I need to see where it happened. I tried everything: official regulations, safety concerns, personal appeals. Nothing worked. Elena was determined to climb her sister's last route, and Tom was determined to keep her safe while she did it. "At least take radios," I said, handing them a pair of two-way handhelds. "Check in every hour. If I don't hear from you by dark, I'm coming up." They promised to be careful, and I watched them hike toward the cliff with a sick feeling in my stomach. The first radio check came at noon. Elena's voice, crackling with static. "Base camp to Bart. We're at the start of pitch 2. Rock quality is excellent. No problems." 1 p.m. "Everything's fine. The holds are perfect, like the rock was made for climbing." 2 p.m. Static. I tried raising them on the radio, but got no response. "Equipment failure," I told myself. "It happens in the mountains all the time." By 3 p.m., I couldn't stand it anymore. I grabbed my rescue gear and headed for Raven's Rock at a dead run. I could see them from the base of the cliff, 2 tiny figures moving up the granite face. They were about 100 feet up, right where the Devil's Backbone crack system split into 2 possible routes. Elena was leading, Tom belaying from a stance below her. As I watched, Elena reached it for a handhold and stopped. Even from ground level, I could see her body go rigid. She hung motionless for a long moment, then started climbing again. But wrong, moving toward the right-hand crack instead of the easier left route her sister would have taken. I cupped my hands and shouted, "Elena, wrong way! Go left!" She didn't respond. She didn't even look down. Tom finished the pitch and followed Elena up the right-hand crack. They moved steadily upward, making good time despite choosing the harder route. But something about their movement bothered me. They climbed with perfect precision, each move flowing into the next without hesitation or rest. Too perfect. Real climbers pause to read the rock, to plan their next move. They shake out tired muscles and adjust their gear. Elena and Tom climbed like machines, like they were following a program. At 4 p.m., they disappeared. I don't mean they climbed out of sight behind a ridge or into a chimney. I mean they were there 1 second, 2 clear figures against the granite, and gone the next. The cliff face was empty, like they'd never been there at all. I grabbed my binoculars and studied every inch of the upper wall. Nothing. No climbers, no ropes, no sign that anyone had ever been up there. Then I noticed the handholds. The right-hand crack system Elena and Tom had been climbing was changing. Holds appeared and disappeared like a stop-motion movie played too fast. The rock flowed and shifted, creating new features while erasing old ones. It was like watching someone redraw the cliff face in real time. A new route formed, leading from where Elena and Tom had disappeared up to a section of blank wall I'd never paid attention to before. As the route stabilized, I saw something that made me drop the binoculars. There were shapes pressed into the granite, human shapes like fossils in sedimentary rock. Arms outstretched, faces turned upward, perfectly preserved in stone. I could make out 5 distinct figures spread across a 20-foot section of cliff. Sarah Chen, Michael Torres, Jennifer Walsh, David Kumar, and now Elena Vasquez and Tom Chen, all of them trapped in the rock like flies in amber. I grabbed my radio and tried one more time. "Elena, Tom, this is Bart. Please respond." Static answered me. But underneath the white noise, I heard something else. Voices, faint and distorted, speaking words I couldn't quite make out. The voices sounded scared. I was still staring at the human shapes in the stone when movement caught my eye. The cliff face was rippling again, but this time the waves were coming toward me. The granite flowed like water, and the shapes of the trapped climbers began to sink deeper into the stone. In minutes, they were gone completely. The wall looked normal again, just another section of Raven's Rock. But I knew they were still there, somewhere inside the living stone, still conscious, still trapped, still trying to call for help on radio frequencies no one would ever hear. That night, I called Jake and asked him to meet me at my house. When he arrived, I poured us both a large whiskey and told him everything I'd seen. "The rock is definitely alive," I said, "and it's collecting people." Jake nodded like this made perfect sense. "My grandmother said it was sleeping when the first white settlers came through, but all the climbing, all the disturbance, it's waking up. Can we kill it? I don't know, but I know someone who might." He pulled out his phone and called his uncle, old Joe Stormcloud. They talked in Cherokee for several minutes before Jake hung up. Uncle Joe wants to see the rock for himself. He says there might be a way to make it sleep again, but it'll be dangerous. More dangerous than letting it keep eating people? Jake looked at me with dark eyes. Depends on whether you're willing to climb into its mouth to poison it from the inside. Old Joe Stormcloud was 83 years old and hadn't climbed anything more challenging than a stepladder in 20 years. But when he looked at Raven's Rock, his weathered face went pale. It's bigger than my grandmother said, he whispered. Much bigger. We'd hiked in before dawn, carrying a pack full of specialized equipment that Jake had gathered from sources he wouldn't name. Traditional Cherokee items mixed with modern chemistry. Eagle feathers, tobacco, and something in glass vials that smelled like battery acid. The whole cliff face is one creature, Joe explained as we geared up. What you think is granite is really its shell, its protective skin. Underneath, it's soft and vulnerable. The Cherokee used to make offerings to keep it sleeping, but when the offering stopped, it got hungry, I finished. Hungry and angry. My grandmother said the creature feeds on life force, on the energy that makes a person more than just meat and bone. The climbing draws it, makes it reach out for fresh food. Jake was arranging the vials in a climbing pack, handling them like they contained explosives. The acid will hurt it, make it let go of the people it's holding, but someone has to get it deep inside the creature, past the protective shell. I looked up at the cliff face, knowing what they were asking. You want me to let it catch me? It's the only way, Joe said. You're the best climber, the most experienced. If anyone can get deep enough inside and still get out. What about the people it's already caught? Sarah and the others? Joe's expression was grim. If they've been inside too long, there might not be enough left to save. The creature digests slowly, keeps its prey conscious as long as possible. But their minds... He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. I strapped on my harness and checked my gear one last time. The plan was simple in theory. Climb high enough to trigger the creature's hunting response, let it start to absorb me, then deploy the acid deep in its body and escape before it could recover. Simple in theory, suicidal in practice. If this goes wrong, I told Jake, tell my mother I was trying to help people. Don't let her know about the rest. I started climbing. The first 50 feet felt normal. Solid granite, good holds, predictable rock. But as I climbed higher, I felt the warmth begin to seep through my gloves. The stone was getting softer, more pliable. At 70 feet, my right hand sank into what looked like solid granite. The rock closed around my fingers like wet clay, holding me in place. I tried to pull free, but the stone's grip was iron strong. The cliff face began to ripple around me. Holds appeared under my feet, perfectly shaped for my climbing shoes. New handholds formed exactly where I needed them, making the climb effortless. The creature was helping me climb higher, drawing me toward its center. At 90 feet, both my hands were sunk wrist-deep in living stone. The rock was warm and soft now, pulsing with a slow, steady rhythm like a massive heartbeat. I could feel myself being pulled deeper into the cliff face, the granite flowing around my arms like thick liquid. This was where the other climbers had made their mistake. They'd fought the creature, tried to escape too early, but I let myself sink deeper, playing dead while the acid vials pressed against my chest. The world went dark as the stone closed over my head. Inside the creature, I found hell. The space around me was soft and warm and alive, like being inside a stomach made of heated rubber. Phosphorescent veins in the walls cast a sick green light over everything, and in the walls themselves, pressed into the living flesh like decorations, were the missing climbers. Sarah Chen hung suspended 3 feet to my left, her eyes wide and staring. Her mouth moved constantly, but no sound came out. She was trying to scream. The others were deeper in the walls, sunk so far that only their faces were visible. David Kumar's eyes tracked my movement, recognition flickering in their depth. He'd been trapped for weeks, conscious the entire time. I pulled out the acid vials and smashed them against the nearest wall. The creature's reaction was immediate and violent. The walls around me convulsed, trying to expel the poison burning its flesh. Digestive fluids, thick and yellow and reeking of death, poured from hidden glands, trying to neutralize the acid. Sarah Chen's body began to emerge from the wall as the creature's grip weakened. She was alive but barely human, her mind shattered by weeks of slow digestion. The others were in worse shape, their bodies partially dissolved, their sanity long gone. The creature was dying, but it was taking its time about it. I grabbed Sarah and started moving toward what I hoped was the way out. The walls were bucking and writhing around us, trying to trap us in the collapsing space. More acid ate through the creature's flesh, opening wounds that leaked black blood. The exit appeared suddenly, a gap in the writhing flesh that led back to stone and air and sanity. I pushed Sarah through first, then squeezed after her as the creature's death screams shook the entire cliff. We emerged from the rock face like being born in reverse, spilling out onto a ledge 80 feet above the ground. Sarah was unconscious but breathing. The other climbers were still trapped inside the dying creature, and I knew there wasn't time to save them. Jake was already rappelling up to meet us, his face pale with relief. Did it work? The answer came from the mountain itself. Raven's Rock shuddered and groaned, a sound like grinding stone mixed with a dying animal's cry. Cracks appeared in the cliff face, spreading outward from where we'd emerged. The entire 200-foot wall began to crumble. "Rope!" I shouted. Jake threw me a line and I clipped Sarah to it, then myself. We rappelled into space just as Raven's Rock came apart above us, 200 feet of granite collapsing into rubble and dust. The creature's death roar echoed through the mountains for a full minute before fading into silence. When the dust settled, there was no more Raven's Rock, just a pile of ordinary stone and the memory of something that should never have existed. Sarah Chen survived, physically at least. The doctors said she was suffering from severe dehydration and trauma-induced psychosis. They kept her sedated for 3 weeks while her body healed from whatever had happened to her in the darkness. She never talked about her time inside the creature. When reporters asked about her missing weeks, she would stare at the wall and whisper about being held in the stone until the nurses came to sedate her again. The other climbers, Michael Torres, Jennifer Walsh, David Kumar, Elena Vasquez, and Tom Chen, were never recovered. The official report listed them as victims of the rock slide that destroyed Raven's Rock. Tragic accident, geological instability, case closed. I retired from the Park Service 6 months later, told everyone I was burned out from the rescue work, needed a desk job. They transferred me to administration in Richmond, where I process reports and try not to think about living stone. Jake Stormcloud quit climbing entirely. He moved to Arizona to work construction, as far from granite cliffs as he could get. We don't talk much anymore, but when we do, it's never about rocks or mountains or things that hunt in the darkness. Old Joe Stormcloud died peacefully in his sleep 2 months after Raven's Rock fell. His last words to his grandson were a warning. "Tell them the stones are waking up everywhere now. What we killed was just one of them." The Cherokee were right to leave offerings for the sleeping stones. We should have listened. Last month I got a call from a park ranger in Colorado. She'd found climbers' gear embedded in solid granite near Boulder, no bodies, no explanation. The week before that, it was a ranger from New Hampshire reporting missing hikers near Cathedral Ledge. Similar stuff. Rees are coming in from climbing areas across the country. The other creatures are stirring. Sometimes late at night when the office is empty, I feel phantom sensations in my hands, like they're still sunk deep in warm, living stone. Like somewhere in the darkness, something is still trying to pull me back into its hungry mouth. I've started carrying a small vial of acid in my pocket, just in case. If you're a climber reading this, remember, test every handhold twice. The mountain might be testing you back. And if the rock feels warm under your fingers, if the holds seem too perfect, if the route changes when you're not looking, run. Don't try to be a hero. Don't try to save anyone else. Just run and pray the stone doesn't follow. Because once they wake up, they're always hungry, and they never forget the taste of human life. My My name is Ezekiel Mountain Hawk, but everyone just calls me Zeke. Been a park ranger for 13 years now, working the Jefferson National Forest here in Virginia. Before that, I did 2 tours in Vietnam, came back home to these mountains in '72, married my high school sweetheart Sarah, and we got 2 boys. Tommy's 15 now, and little Jake just turned 12. I tell you this because what I'm about to share sounds impossible. But I swear on my children's lives, every word is true. October 1978 started cold. Early frost hit the ridges, and thick fog rolled through the valleys most mornings. I remember thinking how quiet the woods felt that month. Even the birds seemed nervous, like they knew something was coming. My specialty is wilderness survival and search and rescue. Trained 47 volunteers over the years, and I know these mountains better than my own backyard. There's not a trail, cave, or creek I haven't walked at least twice. That's why what happened on Hollering Ridge shook me so bad. Hollering Ridge sits 8 miles from the nearest fire road, deep in the backcountry where most folks never go. It's Cherokee land originally. My grandmother was half Cherokee, and she used to tell stories about that place. Said it was sacred ground, but not the good kind. She called it where the Yenaski lived, stone giants who steal voices. I never believed in them old mountain tales about voice thieves. Figured they were just stories to keep kids from wandering too far into the woods. The ridge itself is all limestone and ancient rhododendron thickets. Hidden sinkholes everywhere, some dropping 30 feet straight down into darkness. Caves snake through the rock like wormholes, and the acoustics play tricks on you. Shout from one end of a hollow, and it might echo back from 3 different directions. That's what I told myself when it started anyway, just to ois. It was a Tuesday morning when the call came in. Family of 4, the Hendersons from Richmond, were 3 days overdue from a camping trip. Last radio contact came from somewhere near Hollering Ridge. The husband, Mike, had called in saying they were hearing strange echoes and asking about cave systems in the area. Then nothing. My partner Cole Whitethorn and I geared up for a standard search. Cole's been ranging almost as long as me, good man, steady hands. We loaded up water, medical supplies, ropes, and emergency gear. Weather was supposed to hold clear for 2 days. Probably just got turned around, Cole said as we hiked in. City folks don't understand how easy it is to lose your bearings up here. I agreed, but something felt wrong from the start. The silence bothered me most. After 13 years in these woods, you get used to the constant background noise. Insects buzzing, birds calling, squirrels chattering, wind in the leaves. But that morning, I heard nothing. Not even our own footsteps seemed to echo right. 3 hours in, we found their campsite. The tent was still up, sleeping bags laid out in a perfect circle around a cold fire pit. Food sat on the camp table, sandwiches with 1 bite taken, coffee still warm in metal cups. Like they'd just stepped away for a minute. But their boots were lined up neat as soldiers outside the tent. All 8 boots, 4 pairs, arranged in a straight line pointing toward the ridge. Who takes their boots off to go exploring? Cole asked. I didn't have an answer for that. We called out their names. Mike Henderson, Susan, kids. My voice carried across the hollow and came back wrong. Not like a normal echo. It sounded like someone else was calling their names, using my voice but not quite getting it right. The timing was off, and there was something cold in it. Cole heard it too, saw it in his face. Acoustic tricks, I said, more to convince myself than him. These limestone caves make sounds bounce funny. We started a grid search, following standard procedure. Cole went east along the creek. Bed. I took the western slope toward the ridge itself. We had radios, but they crackled with static in the deep hollows where the rock blocked signals. That's when I heard the first one. Clear as day, a little girl's voice calling, "Daddy! Daddy, help me!" from somewhere up the ridge. I keyed my radio. Cole, you copy that? Static, then his voice, tense. Copy. Little girl calling for help, maybe 200 yards from my position. Same here. But that's impossible. We're half a mile apart. We both started climbing toward where we'd heard the voice. My legs were burning by the time I reached the top of the ridge, but I found nothing. No footprints, no sign anyone had been there. Then I heard it again. Same little girl's voice, same words. "Daddy, Daddy, help me." But now it was coming from behind me, back down in the hollow where I'd just been. I spun around and nearly fell. That voice was perfect, too perfect. It had the exact tone, the exact fear, like someone had recorded it and was playing it back. "Cole, radio check." Nothing but static. I started back down, following game trails and trying to keep my bearings. The fog was thickening and the afternoon light looked strange, too dim, too gray, like it was being filtered through dirty glass. That's when I found the first tracks, in soft mud beside a creek pressed deep and clear, a human footprint, but 12 feet long. I stared at it for a full minute, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The shape was right, 5 toes, arch, heel, but the size was impossible, like a normal human foot scaled up 3 times bigger. More tracks led upstream, each one perfect and deep. Whatever made them was heavy. My hands were shaking as I took photos with my camera. The rational part of my brain kept insisting there had to be an explanation. Maybe it was pareidolia, seeing patterns that weren't really there. Maybe the mud had swollen the tracks, made them look bigger, but I could see the toe marks, individual toes, each one as long as my hand. I followed the tracks for maybe 50 yards before they just stopped. Not like they went onto hard ground where I couldn't see them. They literally ended mid-stride in the mud. One track, then nothing. That's when I heard my own voice calling from deep in the woods. "Zeke! Zeke, over here! Found them!" It was my voice, my exact tone and inflection. But I was standing alone in a creek bed, and the sound was coming from a thick stand of rhododendrons about 100 yards away. My blood went cold. I grabbed for my radio, but my hands were shaking so bad I nearly dropped it. "Cole, Cole, do you copy?" Static then. "Zeke, where are you? I can hear you calling, but I can't find you." "I'm not calling. Someone else is using my voice." Long pause. Then Cole's voice. Quieter. "Same here, partner. Something's using mine, too. I can hear myself talking, but it's not me." We agreed to meet back at the Henderson campsite. I marked my position and started back, but every step felt wrong. The woods were too quiet, and the fog was getting thicker. I could barely see 20 feet in any direction. Then I heard them all at once. Mike Henderson's voice. "Susan, bring the kids this way." Susan Henderson's voice. "Mike, where are you?" The little girl. "Mommy, I'm scared." A boy's voice. "Dad, something's following us." All coming from different directions, overlapping, like a whole family was scattered through the woods calling to each other. But their voices were wrong. They all had the same cold undertone I'd heard in my own voice earlier, like someone was trying to imitate them but couldn't quite get the warmth right. I ran, don't care how that sounds. I ran through those woods like something was chasing me, crashing through branches and stumbling over root. Thus my heart was hammering and my mouth tasted like copper. When I reached the campsite, Cole was already there, sitting on a log with his head in his hands. "You hear them too?" I asked. He nodded without looking up. "Been going on for 10 minutes. Whole family calling back and forth. But Zeke..." He finally looked at me, and his eyes were wide with fear. I found more tracks, not human ones this time. He led me to a patch of soft ground near the tent. The prints were massive, like bear tracks but wrong. Too long, with claw marks that looked almost like fingers. And they were old. Pressed deep into earth that should have been soft, but the tracks looked like they'd been baked into clay. "How long you think these have been here?" Cole asked. I knelt down and touched one of the prints. The mud around it was cold as ice, even though the day was warm. "I don't know, but I don't think we should be here when it gets dark." That's when we heard the voices stop. All at once, like someone had turned off a radio. The silence that followed felt heavy and wrong. And in that silence, we heard something else. Footsteps, big ones, coming toward us through the fog. The footsteps were slow and deliberate, each one making the ground shake slightly. They came from the direction of the ridge, where the fog was thickest. Cole and I grabbed our gear and backed away from the campsite, trying to stay quiet. My rifle was in my hands, though I wasn't sure what good it would do against something that could make 12-foot tracks. The footsteps stopped just at the edge of where we could see. The fog swirled there like something huge was moving through it, but we couldn't make out a shape. Then the voices started again, but this time they were different. "Zeke!" It was my father's voice. Dad had been dead for 3 years, killed in a car accident. But there was his voice, clear as life. "Zeke, son, you need to get out of these mountains. This place ain't meant for the living." I nearly dropped my rifle. Cole grabbed my arm to steady me. "That's not possible," I whispered. "See, Ara's worried about you, boy." Still my father's voice coming from the fog. "She's home with the boys, waiting for you to come back safe. Don't let whatever's in these woods take you from your family." Tears were running down my face. It sounded exactly like Dad. Same gravel in his voice from 40 years of smoking, same way he called me boy, even after I came back from the war. Cole was staring at me with fear in his eyes. "Zeke, who is that?" Before I could answer, another voice spoke from the fog. A woman's voice, soft and gentle. "Cole? Cole, honey? Is that you?" Cole went white as a sheet. "Mary? I've been looking for you, sweetheart. Been waiting so long." I knew Cole's story. Mary was his wife. Died of cancer 5 years back. He'd never remarried. Said he couldn't love anyone else. "It's not them," I said, grabbing Cole's shoulder. "It's not really them." But Cole was already walking toward the fog, toward that voice that sounded like his dead wife. "Mary, is that really you?" "Come closer, honey. I can't see you clearly." I tackled Cole before he could get to the fog. We rolled in the dirt, wrestling while he tried to get free. "Let me go! It's Mary! She's alive!" "Cole, listen to me. Mary's been dead for 5 years. Whatever that is, it's not her." The voices stopped suddenly. The fog began to clear, and what I saw in that clearing made my blood freeze. A figure stood among the trees, 15 feet tall, made of what looked like gray stone, but the stone was moving like muscle. Its body was roughly human-shaped but massive, with arms that dragged on the ground. The worst part was its chest. Dozens of human skulls were embedded in the rock like decorations, their empty sockets staring at us. And when it spoke, it used all the voices at once. Dad, Mary, the Henderson family, me, Cole, all talking in unison. "You cannot leave. You belong to the mountain. Now!" I hauled Cole to his feet and we ran. Behind us, I heard that thing moving, footsteps like thunder, and the sound of trees breaking as it pushed through the forest. We ran for maybe a mile before we had to stop, gasping for air. My chest felt like it was on fire and my legs were shaking. "What was that thing?" Cole panted. I thought about my grandmother's stories. Yanoski, voice stealer. Cherokee legend says they're stone giants that trap human souls. That's impossible. You got a better explanation? We were deep in the woods now, farther from civilization than when we'd started. The sun was getting low, and the fog was rolling in again. We needed shelter and a plan. That's when we found the cave. It was hidden behind a wall of rhododendrons, just a crack in the limestone barely wide enough for a man to squeeze through. But carved around the entrance were symbols. Cherokee writing, old and deep. "Can you read it?" Cole asked. I traced the symbols with my finger, remembering what my grandmother had taught me. "Voice prison," I said. "It says, voice prison." From somewhere behind us, we heard the thing calling again. This time it was using our own voices, having a conversation with itself. "Zeke, which way did they go?" "Cole, I think they went toward the cave. We better follow them before they get away." It was like listening to ourselves plan our own capture. "We have to go in," I said, looking at the cave entrance. Cole shook his head. "That's what it wants. Drive us into a trap." "Look around, Cole. We're already trapped." The voices were getting closer. I could hear trees breaking again, and the ground was starting to shake with each footstep. We squeezed through the cave entrance just as the fog thickened behind us. Inside, the cave was bigger than it looked from outside, a long tunnel that sloped down into darkness. Our flashlight beams showed more Cherokee symbols carved into the walls and something else. Scratch marks in the stone, like fingernails dragging across rock. Some of them were small, human-sized. Others were huge, mad. Ebi claws as long as kitchen knives. We followed the tunnel deeper, our lights bouncing off the walls. The air was cold and smelled like old bones. That's when we heard the voices inside the cave with us. Help us. It was the Henderson family, but speaking in whispers. We're trapped down here. It won't let us go. Please, another voice said. We've been here so long. The stone giant, whispered a woman. It feeds on our voices, keeps our souls. I counted them as we walked. Dozens of voices, maybe hundreds, all whispering, all begging for help. Men, women, children. Voices from different times, different decades. Some spoke English, others Cherokee. A few in languages I didn't recognize. How long has this been going on? Cole asked. Long time, I said. Maybe centuries. The tunnel opened into a huge chamber, bigger than a cathedral. Our lights couldn't reach the ceiling or the far walls. And in the center of the chamber, we saw them. People. Dozens of them, standing perfectly still like statues. They were alive. I could see their chests moving as they breathed, but they didn't respond to our lights or voices. The Henderson family was there, standing in a neat row. Their eyes were open but empty, staring at nothing. What happened to them? Cole whispered. That's when the voice answered from behind us, our own voices, speaking in unison. They gave us their voices willingly in the end, just like you will. We spun around, and there it was, the stone giant, filling the tunnel entrance, blocking our escape. Up close, I could see that the skulls in its chest weren't decorations. They were still alive. Their mouths moved silently, trying to speak with voices they no longer had. Why? I asked. Why do you do this? The giant tilted its massive head, and when it answered, it used my grandmother's voice, the voice I remembered from childhood stories. The moo. Maintain his lonely grandson. It needs company. It needs voices to fill the silence. I understood then. This thing had been taking people for generations, adding their voices to its collection, keeping their souls trapped in stone. But I also remembered something else from my grandmother's stories. The Yenazgi had a weakness. Cole, I said quietly. You still got that dynamite in your pack? He nodded. We always carried a small amount of explosives for emergency situations. Rock slides, blocked trails. When I say run, you light it and throw it at the ceiling. Bring this whole place down. What about you? I'll distract it. The stone giant stepped into the chamber, and the ground shook with each footstep. As it moved, the skulls in its chest began to glow with a sickly light, and I heard all the trapped voices crying out at once, a sound like wind through a graveyard. You cannot fight what you do not understand, it said, using my father's voice again. Join us willingly, and the pain will be less. I stepped forward, rifle raised, though I knew bullets wouldn't hurt it. I understand enough. You're a parasite. You feed on human voices because you don't have one of your own. The giant's head tilted again, curious. What makes you think I was not once human, like you? That stopped me cold. In the skull light, I could see its face more clearly. Beneath the stone skin, there were human features, a nose, lips, even what might have been hair once. Who were you? I asked. I was the first, it said, and now it used a voice I'd never heard. Old, tired, full of pain. Cherokee brave, taken by the mountain spirits long ago. They showed me how to steal voices, promised I would never be lonely again. But the hunger never ends. It raised one massive arm, and I saw the people standing around us begin to sway. They were trying to move, trying to run, but their bodies wouldn't obey. Each voice I take makes me stronger, but also hungrier. I thought 4 more would be enough, the family that camps above. But then you came and I smell. It's something different on you. What? Cherokee blood. Old magic. Your voice would be worth 10 others. The giant took another step forward and cracks appeared in the cave floor. The whole mountain was groaning under its weight. Behind me, Cole was quietly pulling the dynamite from his pack. We had maybe 30 seconds before that thing reached us. You want my voice? I said, backing toward the cave wall. Come and take it. The giant smiled, actually smiled, with human teeth made of stone. I will. But first, let me show you what happens to those who resist. It turned toward Cole and opened its mouth. What came out wasn't sound. It was like a wind made of whispers, all the stolen voices rushing out at once. Cole screamed as the wind hit him, and I watched in horror as his voice was torn from his throat. Cole fell to his knees, mouth open, trying to scream but making no sound. His voice joined the others in the giant's chest, another skull appearing among the collection. Now you, the giant said, turning back to me. But Cole had done his job. Even voiceless, even terrified, he'd lit the fuse on the dynamite. I saw him throw it toward the ceiling with the last of his strength. Run! I shouted, grabbing Cole and dragging him toward a side passage I'd spotted earlier. The explosion was like the world ending. The ceiling of the great chamber collapsed in an avalanche of limestone and ancient rock. The stone giant roared, the first sound I'd heard it make with its own voice. And then it was buried under tons of stone. But the mountain wasn't finished with us. As we stumbled through the side tunnel, more explosions echoed behind us. The whole cave system was collapsing, and we could hear the giant moving under the rubble, trying to dig its way out. We ran through tunnels I didn't know existed, following Cherokee trail markers carved into the walls. My grandmother had told me about these, escape routes built by her people long ago, in case the voice stealer ever broke free from its prison. Behind us, the giant's voice followed, weaker now, but still calling. You cannot seal me forever. I will find new voices. I will feed again. We found an exit on the far side of the ridge, a hidden crack that opened onto a steep slope. Cole and I tumbled out into daylight just as the final explosion shook the mountain. The entire cave system collapsed, sealing the giant under millions of tons of rock. We lay there in the grass, gasping and bloody, listening to the mountain settle. Cole tried to say something, but no sound came out. He'd never speak again. But we were alive. As the sun set over Hollering Ridge, I helped Cole to his feet and we started the long walk back to civilization. Behind us, the mountain was quiet. For now. The official report listed the incident as a geological collapse caused by underground instability. The Henderson family was declared lost in a wilderness accident. Their bodies never recovered. Cole and I were hospitalized for exposure and psychological trauma. Nobody asked too many questions. The government boys who showed up were polite but firm. We'd experienced a rock slide, nothing more. The cave entrance was sealed with concrete and marked as a geological hazard zone. Cole never spoke again. Doctors said there was nothing physically wrong with his throat, but he never made another sound. He communicates through writing now, and his eyes still hold that terror from the cave. Me, I couldn't handle the silence anymore. After 13 years in the wilderness, I couldn't stand being alone with my thoughts. Transferred to a desk job in Richmond, pushing papers and filing reports. The mountains call to me sometimes, but I don't answer. The Cherokee elder I talked to, my grandmother's nephew, said the binding ritual worked, at least for now. But he warned me that the Yanoski was old and patient. It would find a way to feed again, eventually. Other rangers throughout the Appalachian system have started reporting similar incidents. Voices calling from empty woods, people going missing near limestone caves, equipment failures, and unexplained phenomena. I tell them what I told the investigators. If you hear your own voice calling from the mountains, don't answer. Don't go looking for the source. And whatever you do, don't follow it into the dark. Because sometimes, late at night when the world is quiet, I still hear them. All those trapped voices calling from beneath Hollering Ridge. They whisper my name in the darkness, begging me to come back and set them free. But I know the truth. The stone giant is still down there, waiting, healing, getting stronger. And someday, when enough time has passed and people have forgotten the old warnings, someone will break that seal. Someone will go into those caves looking for adventure or treasure or just answers. And the Yanoski will have new voices to add to its collection. My name is Ezekiel Mountain Hawk. I used to be a park ranger. I used to believe the mountains were safe. I don't believe that anymore.